I suspect that tonight could be one of the quietest. Why is that? Well, I'm not sure. I've got a reasonable idea. In the 7 or so years that the vPub's been going, I have never dedicated a single session to single grain whiskey, which is weird when you consider that the biggest single category of Scotch whisky by volume is single grain whiskey. I know that we are here for the malt most weeks, but after 7 years, more than 7 years, isn't it about time we gave single grain Scotch whisky a little bit of a highlight? I'm looking forward to it. I'll see you all in a second. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the vPub. Welcome to another Thursday night. Hope you're all doing very, very well. Yes, I was quite surprised by this one. I've got a topic list, and some of these things on the topic list, let's say they've just been on there for a long time. The one that's at the very, very bottom, almost at the point where it's ready to drop off, and it's been on that list for so long, I can't even imagine, is single grain whiskey. Now, I put it to you, why have I not covered the topic? Well, there's a couple of reasons. I'm not particularly knowledgeable anyway, but not particularly knowledgeable when it comes to single grain. And also, I always felt like I didn't really have much experience with single grain in terms of enjoyment and trying to learn about single grain and single grain distilleries. And it just kind of felt like something that could be done later. Now, that's crazy because this channel started 8 years ago next month. 8 years ago, the channel started, and the first ever video that went live, you don't need to go back and watch that, was actually a single grain, a blind taste challenge type video. So the channel started with single grain, and yet it's been pretty much ignored since then. There'll be one or two vPubs where a single grain Scotch whisky will make it into the discussion, or maybe a blended grain such as Compass Box's Hedonism or something like that. But generally speaking, it's been widely and largely ignored. So we're going to dedicate an entire session to it tonight. And more than that, we're going to really focus in on these kind of large, almost juggernaut style class distilleries. You know, they're more like industrial plants to see them. There's nothing particularly romantic or anything about their image, how they look. They're interesting enough. I would love to see inside one of them one day and see how it all goes together and things. But generally speaking, it's not a tourist experience. These are industrial sites. We have, it depends on what you want. We have 7 of them. There are 8 single grain distilleries in Scotland now, because obviously there's one in the borders called Reivers, but it's tiny and it's doing a very different thing. It's quite a specialist little site. So it'll be mentioned tonight, but I don't have any whiskey from there, and it's not really the focus of tonight. And of course, we've also got Loch Lomond in the Southern Highlands that does a bit of a juggling act between the two. And they've got a single grain plant, a pretty large scale plant on there, but they're probably the smallest in Scotland when it comes to single grain production. And they've also got single grain whiskey going through their malt hall as well, but it's a very different thing. And we'll get to that soon. So we'll cover that quite quickly, and then we'll move on to these big grain distilleries. Because I think what's interesting about them, and what's always been interesting about them, truthfully, but even more so in 2025, is that they are affordable relative to malt whiskies. I've got 8 whiskies here. I'm not going to go through all 8 of them tonight. I'm going to focus on uncorking tonight. So there's 6 whiskies that are sealed that I've been collecting over time. Some of them I've purchased just this week, but 1 or 2 others have been around for a wee while. If I add up the age of these 8 bottles, next to me, we're at 200 years. And it's ranging from 14 years on the label up to in excess of 30. The average age across these bottles is 25 years. And yet, I haven't broken £100 for anything. In fact, some of them, they were less than £40. Anyway, we'll go through them one at a time tonight, and I'll try and get back or get some feedback from you guys to work out what your feelings are on single grain whiskey as well. Before we get into all of that, I'll raise a wee glass to welcome you all into another Thursday night vPub session, and jump into the lounge to welcome some of you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. Cheers. So as you're getting comfortable, we've had storm warnings all day today. For tomorrow, big red alert storm warnings. As you're getting comfortable, putting your feet up, pouring yourself a dram, whatever it may be, now's the time to get my attention by simply typing Aquavitae. I know a lot of you would have already said hello and things like that in the beginning while I was chatting and getting the intro. But truthfully, the reason I do this and the reason I welcome the lounge at this time is that people are getting comfortable. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes for people to join by the time the YouTube notifications go out and things like that. So it's nice to just ease into things. Mike Molasses, good to see you, buddy. I hope you're doing well. He's saying, cheers, Roy. Al McLaughlin is here as well. Fantastic to see you, buddy. I hope you're keeping well. Jimmy Legg is in the house along with the other Jimmy Jazz. We've got both Jimmys in tonight. We have a legitimate vPub. Fantastic to welcome you both. Hellswood is here saying 25-year-old blended grain in the glass Aquavitae this evening. I wonder which one that is. A wee blended grain. Nice on theme as well, Helen. Evening, Roy. Aquavitae, no opinion here. Just full of curiosity and ignorance tonight. Well, let's see what we can do about colouring some of the picture in very kind of broad brushes strokes. Pete Edison, evening, Roy. Despite sipping my single malt, looking forward to yet another interesting vPub. Frank, you're welcome here, regardless of what you're sipping. You don't always need to be on theme, certainly. And I would suspect that maybe, Frank, you don't have a lot of single grain kicking around, me having some idea of what your preferences are. George L is here. Greetings, Roy. We have a few Arizona barflies in the vPub tonight. Drew from Arizona is in. I can see Drew's in as well. That's magic. George is here. All we need is Tom O. And maybe one or two other Arizonians, folk from Arizona joining us tonight in the middle of their day, of course, but it's wonderful to have you. Jerry Miller is here. Good to see you, Jerry. And Annie Tiger is saying, in Sweden, we don't have a large selection of grain whiskey. Could be true. Big malt lovers in Sweden, aren't you? Stevie O's here. Yo, Roy, great to join in the single grain crew. Wonderful to have you, Stevie. And it was nice to welcome you in Glasgow on Monday night. It was a wonderful tasting. We had the Thompson brothers co-hosted a wee event with them where they brought along 3 beautiful, gorgeous Dornoch malts to share with us all, and also 3 independent bottlings of theirs, actually 4 in the end, because they gave us a bonus bottle at the end, their 1986. And I opened it with the Limburg Sutherland, the one that I picked up in Limburg last year. I managed to share that with a room full of 40-odd barflies, and it was just fantastic. A bit of a hectic night. I squeezed in perhaps more people than should comfortably fit in the Bon Accord, if I'm honest. But it was just as we were getting close to the event and more people were interested in joining, I just squeezed in a few more. That said, I hope most people still had a good night. It was a Monday, it was a school night, but I loved it. It was great fun. Bob Sander is saying, we only have 2 grain whiskies, a 46-year-old Carsbridge and a 30-year-old Invergordon. I don't reach for grain, so perhaps I just need to do a few flights and challenge my ignorance. Well, there will be a lot of exploration tonight, Bob. There will be a lot of contemplation and thoughts and looking into the value proposition of grain whiskies. But there is no dogma. I'm not trying to force or sell you anything. And I'm not sure yet whether or not I'm actually trying to evangelize the category. I think we need to work out where it fits, how it sits up against our malt whiskey preferences or whatever our preferred lane is, and see where we go from there. But I appreciate your open mind. That's what I'm going to try and keep. Rick Johnson's here. Good to see you, Rick. Just as it jumps, scroll back up. Try and catch... Yes, he's saying good afternoon from lovely sunny San Francisco, Roy, and fellow lovely sunny barflies. Hope everyone's having a tasty Thursday. We're in for some bad weather. I don't think we're going to see so much sunshine over the next couple of days. Pretty scary storm coming in. Donner Pass Whiskey Tim is saying, I think the 20-plus-year-old Canadian whiskey would be similar to Scotch single grain. That'd be interesting. I don't have any experience of Canadian whiskey at that age, apart from once upon a time I tried the Wisers. Was it Wisers 40-year-old? It's a donation from Andy Foodquig. He sent it over to Glasgow and we shared it at one of the tastings back in 2018 or 2019. Max Kreitner is saying, good evening, my friend. No grain for me. I always get an acetone note, which I really don't like. Only exception, the Loch Lomond malted barley grain bottlings. Interesting, Max. Craig Willis is saying, good evening, Roy. Not any Scotch single grain, so poured a single grain Nika instead. Fantastic. At least it says single grain, despite being 100% malt. So I'm counting it as being on theme. It's probably 100% malt, but made not made in pot stills. Michael Wood is saying, hi Roy, Signatory Vintage, 14 years, North British bottled, 23rd of June 2009. Or distilled in 23rd of June 2009. That, Michael Wood, is what I have in my glass right now. That's the warm-up dram. This was a gift to me from cousin Kevin, actually. I think he might have got it from auction or abroad or something, I'm not sure. This one was bottled in 2024, February last year. It's in the glass right now. I'm quite surprised at the texture. There's a decent amount of weight. Single grain whiskies are often associated with being really quite light and sweet. This is certainly a sweet whiskey. But I'd say, as a wee starter dram, it's perfect, and it's a canny coincidence that we've both got the same thing. Tom Ferrari's here saying, even Aquavita, if only our average age was around 25. Absolutely, Tom. Anyway, just a Teeling single grain for me, the only one in my collection, perfectly on theme. We're going to be talking about the Scotch distilleries tonight, but absolutely, it's not restricted to Scotland. Peter is saying, nope, not a single grain in the house. I was right. Henry Blake is here. Good to see you, Henry. I welcomed you in Glasgow on Monday night, my friend. It was wonderful to see you there. 30-year-old Targe. It's Targe, single grain in the glass. Loved Monday at the Bond. Great evening. Fantastic, Henry. I hope that means that you'll be coming back for another one soon. And I'll try my very best to get around more tables. I feel like, you always feel like you haven't chatted to everyone at these kind of events. Alistair Gray is saying, good evening, sir, on a North British 33. Then we'll finish on a North Star blended 50-year single grain. Superb value. Wow. Sounds like it as well, Alistair. And I think that that's going to be a theme, us looking at value tonight. A couple of people in joined the Barflies early on. J. Wire, 1977, joined the Aquavita Barflies, and Cesare the Fly is celebrating being a member for 21 months, saying, even Aquavita in my glass, Loch Lomond peat, 46% ABV, and my small barrel after Aronia. Good stuff. Cesare and J. Wire, thank you both for your support. What they're doing is that they're keeping all the YouTube content on this channel completely ad-free. I no longer seek advertising revenue, and I haven't done for a number of years now from Google, because we've been building up the Barfly membership over the years, and it works out much, much better for me, and I hate ads. Tobias is here, and he's bought me a very generous dram. Tobias, good to see you. Just home from celebrating my birthday. Raise a glass and cheers to you all, lovely people. I met last fall, and all of you didn't yet. Okay, we've not met all of us, but you met a lot of us last fall. Fantastic, Tobias. Wonderful to have you in here. But the most important thing, let's raise a wee glass to say many happy returns, my friend, and thank you for buying me a dram on your birthday. Cheers, Tobias. All right, I'll try and keep up with the chat as much as I possibly can throughout tonight. Things should move a wee bit slower tonight, I think. I think there's a lot of people out there that's decided that single grain isn't for them. They'll dabble with the occasional blend maybe, but malt is where their heart lies. Some people are a wee bit more open-minded, especially when it comes to good value and decent age statements and things like that. But I suspect that maybe I fall into the category of the people that absolutely are sold on malt and the prospect of malt. Why? Because, well, it's been 7 years and this is the first time I'm dedicating a session to single grain whiskey. Let me start very, very quickly by differentiating or making it clear what single grain whiskey is. And I apologise, I'll keep this very brief for anybody that is longer in the tooth, let's say. But I think I want to just clarify the difference between the two, because there are two types of whiskey made in Scotland, and they are not the same drink. They are very, very different things. We have single malt whiskey, which all of the vPubs up until now has focused on, or the majority of the time has focused on single malt whiskey. And that is made at northwards of 150 distilleries in Scotland in 2025, making all the malts that we know and love, everything from Springbank to Old Pulteney, from Ardnamurchan out on the west to Glengarry out on the east, and all the islands on Islay and everywhere, all made in a batch style, in a pot still, a copper pot still from 100% malted barley. And that's the three things to remember that differentiates single malt from single grain. The single is relevant in both of these categories because that means the geographical location. Single means it's nothing to do with the grain itself. Single means a single location. So if it says Springbank on the bottle and it's a single malt, it can only have been made at Springbank Distillery. That's what the single means. Exact same when we talk about single grain, we're talking about a single distillery location. So the distillery or the plant, these huge industrial plants, as we'll be discussing tonight, they are making single grain. They don't call it single malt. Why? Well, although that there will be a small proportion of single malt barley in the mash bill, if you like, the majority of these are using whichever grain is easy to process for that distillery, or how that distillery is designed, what it's designed to process. And in Scotland, that tends to be wheat. Our grain whiskey tends to be wheat, but there are exceptions, and we'll talk about that tonight. The entirety of tonight's vPub, however, will focus on single grain Scotch whiskey. Now, remember when I talked about single malt being in a batch style and a pot still made from 100% malted barley, we've established that single grain can be made from wheat and rye and corn or maize, whatever else. It is also not made in a batch style. It is cheaply made, or let's say much more efficiently made is probably a better term, through a continuous process. So it's not a fill, discharge, recharge type thing like it is in single malt whiskey. In single grain whiskey, it is a continuous process. Single malt as well is also typically distilled, we're talking about broad brush between about 62 and 79% ABV, something of that window. Some will creep a nudge higher, some a nudge lower, but the ABV, that's probably the maximum distillation strengths. Whereas when we're talking about single grain whiskey, we can easily be up at 90% ABV. It's altogether a much more efficient way of producing a spirit that will be put into an oak cask for the same 3 years as malt and become whiskey after that 3-year period. That's what we're going to be focused on tonight, the single grain aspect. Herben is saying good evening, and everybody here, good to have you in, Herben. And the water of life and independent spirits has bought me a dram. That must be Greg Schwartz to say, great to be here with you all and see many of you live in 7 weeks. My goodness, is it only 7 weeks already? Well, I've got a wee link here, and I'd just like to remind everyone, as I promised that I would do, it's 2025 now, and as Greg's pointing out, we're only 7 weeks away from the project that started, or it feels like it started, from a kind of brainstorming discussion between myself and Greg, and then lots of other super connected, energized, and appropriate people got involved beyond me, and there's actually a real, genuine Independent Spirits Festival happening in Leith on the 15th of March. And I'm just going to pin that at the top there because there are still a few tickets left. It's majority sold out now, but I suspect that most of the barflies are already covered. They have their ticket. You can buy different tiers of tickets, whether you want to go along and watch the screenings of the documentary series or whether you just want to participate in the Whisky Festival itself. You can do both. But go along to the website. The website will go under a rebrand because the branding of the film has been finalized just this week. So we'll rebrand the website to make sure it's absolutely in partnership. But it doesn't matter if you've bought a ticket in the past or if you buy a ticket in the future. They're all the same tickets. And I will be there, hopefully on the Friday, for whatever events are happening on the Friday, and certainly throughout Edinburgh over in Leith on the Saturday. I'll be there for the duration. Really looking forward to it. I think it'll be one of the highlights of springtime, my spring calendar for whiskey this year, and I can't wait. It can't come soon enough. Nice to have you in, Greg, and thank you very much for the generous dram, buddy. Cheers. Craig McGuinness here. Good to see Craig. He's saying, I'm having my oldest whiskey tonight. A 34-year-old single grain from North British and bottled by Uncharted Whisky Co. I wonder if you're enjoying it, Craig. Is it delicious? Doodle the Dràm is saying, Aquavita, I just opened a Port Dundas 14 from Signatory last week. Pleasantly surprised. In the second fill, Oloroso had my brain think it was a TBWSW that had most of its body and finish removed. Pleasantly surprised, except for the lack of body and finish. Right, Arnie? Well, I can tell you that you might see that bottle appear. It's quite interesting that you've opened 14-year-old whiskey from a ghost distillery. Port Dundas was closed. It was shuttered in 2010. So it's no longer, and it will never be again. Fantastic. Mikey Hayes saying, I've got Aquavita up in the Jumbotron at home tonight while I do the washing up. Oh my goodness, that's kind of terrifying to me, Mikey. But aye, nice to have you in, and I hope the washing up is finished quickly so you can get a bit of relaxing done. Okay, so let's start this. I think the best thing to do is just get something out of the way before we move on to all these big single grain places. And that is our pals over at Loch Lomond here, who do a wee range of single grain whiskies, but they are different. They're very different. The rest of tonight is going to be me focusing on non-malt spirits, and I will at some point introduce a malt spirit just as a kind of recalibrator and I've not used a particularly stellar one or a particularly basic one. I've gone for something right in the middle that I think is a really, really super strong, excellent malt whiskey for the price of the money. And we'll do a wee kind of comparison. I'll just try and remember. Because of the storm, all the schools have been closed here for tomorrow. So there is no school run for me. So I've treated myself with an extra empty Glencairn on the table, and I'll be sipping 7 drams with you this evening. We've started already with that, what was it now, a North British 14-year-old from Signatory Vintage. Interestingly, Signatory have been doing wee bottlings like this for a while now. As I say, this is a 14-year-old at 46% ABV. It is kind of almost part of their unchill filtered series, but it is their single grain series. But they do mention natural colour and unchill filtered on there, which is interesting to me because I've always believed that grain whiskey made from wheat put through a continuous still suffers less from flocculation, clouding and hazing at lower temperatures and things than malt whiskey does, so doesn't always need the same heavy chill filtration that malt whiskey tends to be brutalised with in order to keep it clear. But that's just a wee aside. We know that Signatory tend not to filter. Anyway, so this is a Loch Lomond. This is a Loch Lomond single grain. Now, I think a lot of you will be more familiar with, come on camera, and will be more familiar with one that has a red label down here, which is their unpeated single grain, and a green label version, which is their peated single grain. And they are both available online and here and there. And they're very, very inexpensive. I've picked those up for as low as £25 a bottle. And they're beautifully tasty, light, sweet, easy drinking whiskies at 46% ABV, no age stated. This is a wee bit higher in strength. This is their Distiller's Choice Single Grain Scotch whisky, made with 100% malted barley, as the other two are. This is significant. It's made with 100% malt, the same as single malt Scotch whisky is. However, that 100% malt is distilled through a continuous copper still. This copper continuous still is in the same floor, the same hall, as Loch Lomond's straight neck stills and swan neck stills. It's in the malt distillery, but they've got this column still where they distill 100% barley through. 3 different setups of still at Loch Lomond, just part of the armoury that makes up the fantastic flexibility that they have there in that distillery. So sometimes when you see this mixed with their malt, it's put out there as a single blend, which isn't even actually a category. Blended whiskey is a category if you mix single malt and single grain. If you blend any two single malts will make a blended malt, 2 single grains will make blended grain. But if you take 2 from the same distillery and mix them together, that's a single. blend. It's pretty confusing. Single distillery blend, I think, is Loch Lomond will occasionally refer to it as. So let's get this one open. First uncorking of the night. And I'll tell you why I'm not focusing on this tonight. This is 100% natural colour from Loch Lomond. It says so on the box, and I believe the bottle too. Not very sure. It might. I didn't read the bottle. I read the tube. And on the back, it talks about matured in a selection of both first fill and refill American oak casks. Michael has chosen to bottle this expression at 48.8%, non-chill filtered and natural colour, just as nature intended, Loch Lomond. Well, I'm very, very pleased to see that on there. I would be super ecstatic if your malt whiskies could get the same service from you too. Regardless, the things that's happening at Loch Lomond is wonderful to behold, and long lang may your lum reek. So, I happen to know that despite this being a non-age stated product, that the whiskey ages in here are from 7 years all the way through to 12-ish years old. So there's going to be potentially significantly more mature liquids in this version, and I think that's reflected in the price. Let me have a wee look and see if I know what I paid for this bottle. £45 I paid for this. For a non-age stated whiskey, all natural at a 48.8% ABV. But because it's a Loch Lomond I don't have on the shelf, I was very curious. Really quite fruity. I would even go as far to say a wee bit tropical fruity. Pineapple. Coconut, desiccated coconut. Like a cold, creamy sensation, almost like a rice pudding type thing. So maybe great grain, creamy grains. No smoke, no peat. This is unpeated. Light, fruity, and fresh. Very typical Loch Lomond themes in my experience. Let's have a wee sip. Cheers, everyone. Lots of warmth, lots of soft spice, some white pepper, a little chili. Much more spicy and detailed than that North British 14-year-old I've just been sipping. Much more spice and texture to this, but the texture's different. This is a wee bit kind of grippier, a little bit more of a kind of sandpaper sensation, whereas the North British was softer and rounder and kind of gloopier, for want of better words to describe whiskey, right? But this one's a wee bit more kind of jagged. I was almost like there's a bit more detail. Some soft spices in here. The fruit on the palate is much more orchard. Yeah, a wee bit of, maybe a wee touch of the pineapple thing I was getting on the nose. But yeah, there's a grapefruit note here and lots of tart green apple. The sharpness coming from the apple isn't at the forefront. The whole package is quite a sweet package. I suspect that this whiskey will settle a wee bit after being open and breathe a wee bit more. But it's already really super easy drinkable, very tasty, and very similar to, I'm going to pour a wee bit more in the glass so I can sip it throughout tonight if I need to, but also just to let you see the colour as well. Because there's no way you can see the colour in the bottle, right? It's a dark bottle. All the 3 Loch Lomond single grains are in dark glass. It's actually quite a bit darker now that I've poured a wee bit more in, but you can see this is a very, very pale gold whiskey. And that's true of all, whether it's the peated, the unpeated, and it seems this one too, that they're very, very pale and honest in colour. This is the colour of whiskey, especially when it's from first fill and refill casks, right? But a lovely wee whiskey to start. Why am I kind of almost just giving it a bit a lip service and then moving it on? Well, because actually this is a malt whiskey. This is made from 100% malted barley. That's where the malt is going to stop tonight. The reason I mention it is when people think single grain, they reach for the Loch Lomond because legally it is single grain. But in spirit, if you pardon the pun, it's actually made from 100% barley, like all our single malts. The difference is how it's distilled through a continuous still as opposed to pot stills. Ryan Sutherland is here. Good to see you, Ryan. He's saying batch grain distillation through pot stills was a lot more common than people think, especially before laws were put in place. I mean, until the mid 19th century, I mean, I think it was Robert Stein, who was part of the Hague family, came up with a continuous still design. And then a few years later, it was patented and upgraded and improved on by Aeneas Coffey and became known as the coffee still. And that changed the landscape of whiskey production the world over at that point in time in the 19th century, because there was a far more efficient way to make the spirit than they had been traditionally using pot stills. So if you think back to the birth of kind of all of these kind of grocer blender type people back in their shops, wherever they might have been, buying in casks of whiskey and blending to a profile that they could sell to their customers time and again, a consistent style. What they were doing was taking all of these really quite different malt whiskies and they were blending them on site together. Then grain whiskey came along, and this was a very, very inexpensive way of producing spirit, and that quickly overtook in terms of volume, and it gave them this fairly light, easy backbone and canvas in order to build malt flavors on top of, to give birth to Ushers. And well, actually Ushers was the OVG, the original OVG was a blended malt, but the Johnny Walkers and the Dewars and everybody that followed, they started to make whiskey based on a mix of the two. So Ryan's absolutely right. We think that it's grain whiskey has been around forever, but it was the late 19th century that it started to become the prevalent. And on the back of that, there's been lots of fights over time. For instance, there was a time in the early 20th century that you couldn't call whiskey that's been made through a continuous still from grains other than malts, you couldn't call it whiskey for a few years in the early 20th century. It was illegal, and they had to change the law, and it was lobbying campaigning from the big grain distillers that made sure that that could get changed so that their whiskies made from wheat or maize or whatever it may be could also be considered Scotch whiskey as well. And then after that, everything was changed, and 3 years minimum maturation and all of this kind of thing about a decade later. So it's gone through, as Ryan points out, quite a lot of changes over the years based on legislation. Rick Johnson is saying desiccated coconut, a tasting note we don't see enough of. Yeah, I don't know why I specified desiccated coconut. Maybe a creamy coconut, but I think you know what I mean. Rather than a kind of coconut milk or coconut water or something, it's almost like a macaroon type coconut. But it's just an easy sipping, easy clean whiskey. Staying on theme with a 15-year-old Girvan port finish, Hellswood is saying, fantastic to have everyone sipping along with me with their grain whiskies, whatever you have on hand. And if you don't have any grain on hand, whatever you're able to drink in your mood and moment where you are just now. So as I say, the first one I started off with tonight as I'm setting up and welcoming you guys in is one of Signatory's. This is the North British at 14 years old. Thanks to cousin Kevin for this gift. About a year or so ago, you gifted this to me. And I think the first one, I think what we're going to do is go in age order. We'll start with the youngest. Forget about ABV and everything. We'll start with the youngest whiskey and we'll build up from there and get these bottles uncorked tonight. I am expecting something similar from this bottle, which is a Port Dundas. Port Dundas was a distillery. I say was a distillery. Port Dundas was closed in, I told you earlier, didn't I? I think it was 2010, from the north of Glasgow. I think it's flats now. It's been redeveloped up there, but Port Dundas was eventually shut its doors in 2010. And one of the things I remember about Port Dundas being there was the smell of the distillery at certain times. If you were close to it, you could smell that there was something brewing and distilling going on within their walls. But it was a big kind of opaque site. You couldn't easily see a lot of what was going on. And probably going back to when that was really active and really busy in Glasgow, I wasn't probably that interested in whiskey. In the few years that we overlapped, it's still been in existence and me being interested in whiskey 5 or so years, I probably wasn't interested in grain whiskey. But let's have a wee bit of this Port Dundas as I ask you to consider something. Quite apart from the fact that it's a bottle of single grain whiskey, let me ask you, how many closed distillery bottles do you have on the shelves? How many ghost distilleries? How many bottles of whiskey that represent history, never to be seen or repeated again, do you have on the shelf? I mean, I've got a few closed distilleries, you know, Caperdonic, I've got a Brora, I've got a wee bit of Port Ellen, I've got bits and pieces here and there. But there's not a lot that I have. And, you know, the ones that I have had, some have been good, others not so good, Petit Vase and things. I think a good piece of Scotch whiskey making history is difficult to come by. Thomas Dam is in. He's bought me a dram. Sorry, I missed that, Thomas. He's saying, just poured me a 43-year-old Invergordon single cask, filled in a barrel on the precise day of my birth in December 1972. Bought in 2016 for €130. That's quite incredible, Thomas. Now, you've bought me, that's the currency there. It looks like you're in Denmark. So that does sound like an amazing thing. And I missed a dram from my pal Jimmy Legg. I'm not anti-grain whiskey, he's saying. I'm anti-column still whiskey. Oh, it's quite a way to be. And that's interesting because there is a way to distinguish there. You know, you can pot still make different grains. We're not going to touch upon that tonight. There's nothing on the offing that's that. But I think what Jimmy Legg has suggested is that everything that he's tried that's come from a continuous still, there's nothing that's really gripped him. I wonder if that means that you will stop trying. Anyway, let's have a wee go. I'll tell you the specs on this. Port Dundas, closed distillery. It's been closed for 15 years now. This is a wee bit of a deviation. Somebody else was sipping this in the chat. Who was sipping it? I've forgotten who's sipping this, but it's 46% ABV, natural colour, unchill filtered. August 2008, May 2023. Second fill Oloroso sherry, as was said, 14 years old. Closed distillery, £36. £36 for a ghost distillery. It only has to be tasty, right? Quieter than the Loch Lomond that we started with. Let's try a wee bit of this North British. Wow, the Loch Lomond is so bright, so much fruit really on the Loch Lomond. I'm going to put a wee cover on that just to kind of keep that fruit in the glass for a while. The North British as well. It's been open longer, so I think it's just a wee bit more expressive. This Port Dundas is a wee bit more closed, despite the fact it's a completely different cask, second fill Oloroso. So I'm immediately looking for those sherry notes. But with it being refill, second fill, things are a wee bit more in check. There is some quite dry spice here. There's even a wee bit of a kind of sanded wood note. A wee bit wood shop-like, you know, cedar or something. Soft and warm spice, but not much, not amped up. But what I'm really searching for and not getting is fruit. One of the first things I look for is, I'll try and just let the whiskey, just try and not think about anything. But then as I start to try and search for fruit. That's just kind of the way I've settled into doing things. And I'm not finding a lot of fruit on this one on the nose. Maybe some apples, some apple skin. Maybe this will stretch and open up a wee bit with an open bottle. I know that there's someone else in the chat. I just can't remember who's drinking it. Okay, the cask is apparent on the palate. This will open up. Caveat, all the things tonight that I'm going to be uncorking. Neck pour tends to just be a wee bit tight. Whiskey does need to stretch and breathe a little. And most bottles, most whiskies do benefit from breathing a wee bit and being open a little bit. The breathing can happen in the bottle over time, or it can happen just by you pouring a glass and leaving it for a few minutes, right? This is much more expressive on the palate than it was on the nose, sorry. Actually really tasty. I think almost everything I'm going to be sipping tonight is from refill bourbon barrels. This is a bit of an exception in that we've got some Oloroso in the mix here, albeit second fill. But there's a richness here, and I suspect that there's something in here that might make it a wee bit harder to detect that you're sipping a single grain whiskey. It's still sweet. It's still got lots of sugar notes in here, but the sherry is bringing a kind of depth, a little bit of a warmth. Now, I don't know if that was a finishing cask. They've listed the 2 cask numbers here. It's a vatting of 2 second fill Oloroso casks. So it's a small batch product. We don't know if it's spent its entire years in those casks or not. It could be a re-rack situation, but it could be full maturation in those second fill Oloroso. I am surprised to say that in pure drinkability, and the way it plays and the way it finishes, it's quite short on the finish, but there's a sense of moorishness to it. There's enough flavour there, enough character, enough differentiation for me to want to, and I suspect the one that will be drained quickest tonight will end up being that one. I think that's a very, very tasty wee whiskey. It's missing a wee bit of the oiliness. There's a lightness to the palate on this. The North British had a bit of texture and body to it. This is a very light-bodied whiskey. I'm not going to say it's thin. I think it's cruel to suggest that it's thin on the palate, but it's thinner than you might be used to enjoying 14-year-old whiskey at, despite being at 46% ABV. Now I need to frame it in the proposition that we're sipping a bottle of history here from a distillery that's long closed, 15 years closed. And Port Dundas was in production for now on 200 years from the early 19th century. So it's, when I say history, I'm not using the word lightly. It was a massive part of whiskey production. As Ryan pointed out, it would have started originally making malt whiskey, and then at some point in the mid to late 19th century switched to making grain whiskey. But it's been a huge part of whiskey making in Glasgow. And it was because Diageo had the huge investment going on at Cameronbridge over in Fife, that meant that they didn't need Port Dundas, and it was closed. It was eventually closed and to be making no more, as I say, in 2010. So to have that flavour, that quality of whiskey, 14 years old, naturally presented at £36, we're in a very, very narrow end of Scotch whiskey right now to be able to have something like that at that price point. And that second fill Oloroso as well makes it a wee bit of a... Be interesting to put it in a flight of malt whiskies. See how it stood up. I suspect the sugariness to it, the sweetness, and potentially its texture might give it away as being something that's not malt. But I suspect that would attract positive comments from a lot of people on a flight. And that's encouraging to hear on the bottle specs, the Ghost Distillery aspect, but the £36 price point as well. Actually, it was nearer £37, but £37. Quite tasty. Doodle Dram Arnie saying, I get what I mean with a stripped TBBS. Okay, Arnie, it was you, wasn't it, that was sipping this? A stripped TBBSW. So I think what you're talking about there is for it to have some of the sherry notes that the TBBSW has, the 6-year-old, which is a blended whiskey from Thompson Brothers, but only a tiny amount of, it's mostly malt, we believe, in that 6-year-old product. I get the theme, but I think if you were to sip the two of them together, I think it would be like nighttime and daytime. But I get what you mean about the notes, about the sherry notes, about the fact that it's there and they do express themselves in this wee glass. Yeah, strip TBBSW, that's as good a description as anybody. Spot on. David Lorenko from Portugal is here saying, I had a 30-year-old Cameronbridge for my 30th birthday. I would have had to pay more than 3 times that for a single malt. Very tasty also, and for that much time, and wood almost seemed virgin oak finished. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So do you know that it was that much time in the same cask? Sometimes it can get played out about with a wee bit. So I think that's a pretty good start. And what we've started off with is our first closed distillery of the night. Half of the bottles I'm going to be opening with you tonight, half of them are from closed distilleries. And we move right on to the next one, which is also a closed distillery. This is also interesting to me because over the single grain whiskies I've tried over the years, I've never been 100% sure whether I'm sipping whiskey made from wheat or whiskey made from corn. Down here I've got a north of Scotland, which was Strathmore Distillery, which was somewhere around about the Central Belt, pretty close to Cambus, which is going to come up in a discussion later on tonight. But this was a gift to me from my pal Doc, Macallan Fine and Rare. He bought me this for my 50th birthday because this is a 1970 vintage bottle of whiskey. And you can see I'm nursing this because it's fabulous, fabulous, fabulous stuff. I talk about this regularly being Scotch bourbon, and that's, I'm not being playful when I say that. I'm actually trying to use that as a descriptor. There's lots and lots of kind of rich bourbon flavors in there, and I suspect that that could be corn whiskey, but made from maize. There's stories that Invergordon back in the day up in the Highlands was able to handle whiskey, was able to handle maize. But we understand that most of the grain distilleries that's around just now are using wheat and distilling wheat. However, there's one thing we can know for sure, and that is this distillery, Dumbarton. This is a bottling from Dràm Mòr. Dràm Mòr put this out at a very, very fair price, 23 years old. Dumbarton closed in 2002, I think. I think it's as far back as that. There was for a while, a wee kind of semi-malt making operation going on there called Inverleven. Famously, the stills went over to Bruichladdich. You can see gin being made in Ugly Betty over there now. That's originally from Inverleven. But what I'm speaking about here, the liquid that's in this bottle here, is actually quite rare. It's very rare to see a bottle of Dumbarton available. It's not that common. You would need to search a wee bit to get your hands on a bottle of it. But we know if it's single grain whiskey produced at the grain plant at Dumbarton that it's made from maize. Dumbarton didn't have the same kind of continuous stills that were used in Scotch whisky production when it was built. They actually imported American-style continuous 2-column stills that were made from stainless steel. And the whole setup that went around building that distillery around those column stills was designed to handle corn, maize whiskey. Ryan is saying Clackmannanshire was probably the key player in grain production up to the 1990s. Absolutely. Cambus, I've just mentioned north of Scotland, Strathmore. You know, the amount of bulk whiskey, because obviously it's right in the central belt, right? So it's there. It's easy to get the crops in. It's easy to get any kind of necessary fuel in. It's easy to get stuff in, but the most important thing, it's easy to get the stuff out as well. So logistically, it made a lot of sense to have these big distillation plants. I'm going to pull up a wee map here, Ryan, so that people can get an idea of where these places are located in Scotland. And DVDW, I always make a mistake here. I think it's Dan. I got a 20-year-old Dumbarton from first cask from 2000 at cask strength. We'll pour some now. Let me know what you think of it. Can you taste the corn in there? Because I guarantee you that that's going to be corn as well. Ryan Sutherland is saying, could be wrong, but Invergordon uses unmalted green malt in their production intake too these days. Oh, that would be interesting as well. That'd be interesting. So that's... So continuous distillation, obviously, it does use for enzymes and things like that. It does use a very, very small proportion of malted barley, but it can handle unmalted cereals as well, including unmalted barley. Dorpass Whiskey saying, I have a 26-year-old Invergordon that tastes like corn spirit to me. Ooh, so 26 years old, going into the 1990s. Could be true, Tim, could be true. But remember, it's tricky because all single grains, even wheat single grains, tend to have a sweet edge. Have Doogie Lane personal stock, 20-year-old Dumbarton release on the Nook, birthday bottle last year for Andy. Probably still sealed, Helen, I wonder. Dan is saying, got the name right in one. Fantastic. Good. Ryan Sutherland is saying, Black Grange, Carsbridge. There's a few oldies around that neck of the woods. You can still get Carsbridge. On occasion, you will still see a bottle of Carsbridge. Carsbridge was closed in... Was that one of? I think it was maybe closed just ahead of the cull of all the distillery closures in the 1980s, but around that time. So you do occasionally see Carsbridge here and there. I don't have any on the offing tonight, unfortunately, Ryan. Dan is saying it's got a lot of ethanol and pencil shavings, a little fruit estery, but no specific fruit that I can pick out. Doodle the Drama is saying Strathclyde with its ever-streaming chimney is quite a familiar Glasgow sight and sometimes smell too. Absolutely. Another distillery that won't feature tonight will be Strathclyde. I'm not going to do them all. I mean, there's only 7, right? It'd be easy to do them in a night, but if I'm going to venture into closed grain distilleries as well, that kind of opens things up a bit. Talking about opening things up, let's get into Dràm Mòr's 23-year-old Dumbarton. You've got to love a tall round for the glug, right? So we know that this is corn spirit. I'll just hold this up for you all to have a wee look at it again. 57.1% ABV. It's probably coincidence. I'm not sure that they've reduced it or anything to match 100 proof. But yeah, I don't think it says anything on it. Situated on the banks of River Leven in our own hometown of Dumbarton. Okay, of course, they're up in Dumbarton. This now lost distillery produces a fine grain whisky for generations. Best known for their role in the world-renowned Ballantine's blended Scotch, the iconic red brick-clad distillery dominated the Dumbarton skyline from 1938 until the distillery's eventual demolition in 2017. We're delighted to carry on Dumbarton's heritage in every bottle of this fine grain, single grain whiskey. So I remember that huge building. You would drive past it and it was super tall, quite an impressive, imposing, but very industrial building. And now it's obviously gone. But I remember it being there. So this, I believe, is the only corn-based spirit that we're going to sip tonight from closed Dumbarton. 57.1. It's going to jump up quite a bit from the whiskies we've been sipping so far at 48.8 and 46. Oh, but it does not nose like that immediately. So where I've been getting these super fruity forward whiskies at first, immediately what I'm getting with this is, and there is a little bit of, Max Kreitner talked about acetone. Acetone is a good way to talk about it. There's also a kind of wee bit of a sense of something solventy or a little bit of school glue, PVA glue, something like that. And there's a wee bit of that here. I tend to find with these whiskies that can sometimes dissipate straight out the glass. So as you're tasting it, some of the sweeter or the fruitier notes take over and you taste less of that solventy note. But a lot of Scotch malt whiskey drinkers that go to bourbon can't drink bourbon because of that same thing. So I suspect that tends to be a product of the way the spirit is made, certainly rather than its age, this continuous still thing. But there is a wee bit of that kind of pasty glue, solventy note on the nose here. But there's a lot of sweetness, and the sweetness is much more mature. So it's more a kind of toffee, caramel, and something rich I'm not going to go into the damp bookstore type thing. It's not that, but there is something a little more kind of aged and decadent like. And there are some fruits coming forward a wee bit. Cooked fruits, stewed fruits, tinned stewed fruits. If that exists, but you understand what I mean, overripe things, but not quite jammy. What's that aged note? It's not tobaccos and leathers, and it's like old spirit. That's what it tastes. That's what it smells like. 23 years old, isn't it? 23 years old. So we've jumped up in age, almost a decade on what we started with. Cheers. Oh, ABV's helping hugely here. There's a robustness to it. There's weight, power and spice, lots of kind of high frequency details here, things to pick up on, not necessarily suggesting complexity, but things that make you kind of sit up and try and tune in. Sweet and spiced, but rich, much richer than the whiskies we've been sipping up until now. A lot of richness here. I do think that there's an obvious coming to this cold because of the way it noses, because of that kind of slightly solventy edge to things. You might be suspicious that you're nosing an old blend immediately or an old single grain. Popcorn, wow. And that was not, maybe in my subconscious, I'm thinking corn whiskey, but just as I nose that there, a sweet toffee popcorn. I mean, quite amazing, quite almost like I can't smell anything past the popcorn note now. Really, and like that almost kind of dusty smell that comes when you're at the cinema and they've got the big troughs of popcorn that they're just shoveling in and things, that kind of warm, dusty smell. Wow. Scotch, corn, whiskey. It does exist, but because of the legislation here, we can't call it such. Everything is single grain. So if it's made from malt, it's single malt. If it's made from anything else, it's single grain. It's got a longer finish. Still not, you wouldn't call it a particularly long finish, but there's more of a finish here. The only unpleasant side I would say is that at the finish at the end, it betrays a kind of bitterness. There's a kind of saccharine note at the end here. A little bit like you've had some sugar-free gum in your mouth a wee bit too long. But a freshness too that's different from that really quite rich arrival that we had. Almost like a mint element. Let's go in again. I'm tasting popcorn now. Sweet toffee popcorn. There are fruits there. It's maybe like a plum jam, a cooked plums, stewed fruit, cooked in sugar, light brown sugars, that kind of thing. That one of the other themes tonight is clearly going to be, I suspect, sweetness. Sweetness. Difficult to know what I would score this, but this is the best, most engaging, just because of its age. 23 years old. Wonderful that this has come to the market at 57.1% ABV as well, because it brings a lot of vibrance to things, whereas I suspect if they watered that down, it would have potentially suffered from it. But that's sipping quite nicely. That's a nice bottle and an interesting bottle for me to have open on the shelves. Major Nuts saying, Aquavita, well, no grain on my shelf, been nursing a 10-year-old knock do from Cadden Heads, now off to bed, and I'll see you on the rest on the replay. Buddy, thank you very much for joining in. I know that you tend to bail out a wee bit early on us, but that's okay. We are here on the replay, and I look forward to seeing how you got on at the quiz at the end. Now that you're back with us, Major Nut, it's nice to have you back again. Enjoy the rest of the replay. Cheers, buddy. Lowlander is saying sweet or salted popcorn. I have to specify that's right. I'm not getting much of anything salty here at all. It's sweet toffee popcorn. Sweet toffee popcorn. Ryan is saying North British, for example, have 2 streams for unmalted grains and malt, traditional mashing, and then a cooker for maize, etc., all thrown into the same washback. Wow. It's good to have you, Ryan. Jimmy Legg is saying, that's a nice food quick swirl you're doing there. Did I not always do it? Swirl in the mouth or swirl in the glass? Have I not always kind of done that? Right? Have I not always kind of... I know sometimes you'll see me doing this and trying to coat the glass, get as much of the liquid on the side of the glass before I nose it. Just try and get as many of the aromas swirling around as possible. Falscraft is saying, and all, Aquaviti and all, great stream, fascinating aspect of the whiskey world. I'd have loved to stay, but I have to call it a night. Sorry, the day was long, so good night, everyone. Falscraft Klaus, if you have a long day, don't worry about the vPub, because we're here for the entire weekend, my friend. It's nice to have had you in, Klaus, and I hope to bump into you in Germany, maybe even this year. Brian Stormont is saying, great to join in by pouring a Signatory vintage 14-year-old grain from North British I have. Sweet, fruity and moreish. So good, and was sub £40, but I bought it ages ago. Well, I don't know, Brian, we opened tonight with a 14-year-old North British from Signatory. I wonder if it's this one here. This is bottled in February 2024. 23rd of June 2009. If you've had it for a long time, if you've had it for ages, I suspect not. But they tend to be bottled with very, very similar specs. Kel Taylor is saying, best part about having grain pours in the library is blending like the pros. That's very, very true. So if you want to mess around and if you want to add to your grain base, especially when it's £36 a bottle, like the stuff that we started with, if you want to bring in some malts that you're interested in blending with, something with a bit of weight, like maybe a Speyburn 15, something with a bit of peat, like a wee bit of Kalila might be interesting, something with a little bourbon sweetness, like a Deanston 18 or maybe even a Deanston 12 or something. Deanston Virgin Oak would be perfect. Just have a play, blend in little amounts, not sacrificing too much. Once you've got something that you think tastes good in the glass, make yourself a little 10 cl, a 20 cl bottling of it. Make up the proportions that you thought worked in the glass. Seal it up, leave it for a while, put a reminder on your phone, whatever it is, and then go back and sip it a bit later. You might be surprised how you get on, how much fun it is. Might make a mess of it, but if it's inexpensive stuff, nothing lost. Sitting down with a 34-year-old Cameronbridge with you all, says my pal Justin Wan in Hong Kong. Justin, it's wonderful, nice to have you, and thanks for the dram, buddy. But I often wonder, is it very, very late at night for you, or just very early in the morning? Regardless, it's a privilege to have you here. Cheers, buddy. We're getting on well, but there is a wee saccharine note. Do you know what it tastes like on the end, on the finish? That sweetness and that kind of slight mintiness and the vanilla, maybe the vanilla aspect, mix that together. It's almost like I've just had some mint Tic Tacs. Weird, but that's what's there. And it's not the first time I've had Tic Tacs as a whiskey tasting note, but certainly the finish is a wee bit like mint Tic Tacs tonight, that vanilla, mint, and saccharine kind of sweet sugary note. Let's keep going on and move up. We're going to go, as I say, in age order tonight. So from 23 years, we're going to jump up a little bit. I've had this bottle on the shelf for far too long. I really don't know why it was there. I don't know why it was waiting around for so long, but this was a 27-year-old Cameronbridge. And I'm going to, as I mention all of these distilleries to you, these names and things, I'm going to try and help you see the layout of the land. I've got a wee map here that I think I can pull up in order for you to work out where these places are located. And then I've got a second map that I'll be able to give you an idea of the scale of these places. Earlier on, I told you about how if you look at these numbers here, we've got 414 million litres per annum single grain capacity. That's not what's necessarily made. I'm not very sure. I dug around and by my estimate, I would be probably we're closer to something like 300 million litres actually made. Not sure. And then at 405 million litres of malt production, more or less, depending on the year that you're talking about. For a couple of years there in the early 2020s, we had a weird thing happening where the scale of malt distillation grew so rapidly, so quickly. And I'm not speaking about all the new distilleries coming on board. Not really. They're very small scale. I'm talking about the huge expansion at places like Macallan, Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, and things like that, where they were going from 10, 11, 12 million litres, or Macallan at 9 million litres to 15, 9, 10, 11, 12 million litres at Glenfiddich, and Glenlivet to up to 21 million litres now. So for a couple of years there, what we had was malt whiskey, which is a very, very rare occurrence. In fact, for 150 years, it was the other way around, where there was more grain whiskey being produced. But we saw more malt getting produced for a little while there. I'm not sure what's happening in 2024 or 2025, what the plans are for 2025, but it's going to be interesting to see in the future. That's the scale of things. I'll talk about scale a wee bit more in a minute, but I'll give you a concept of where these distilleries are located here. I hope you can see that. I don't know how clear that map is going to be for everyone, but you can see in the kind of mid-blue area here, that's the Highlands. There are only 2 of these grain distilleries existing in the Highlands, and that's Loch Lomond in the Southern Highlands, and Invergordon that's owned by White and Mackay up there in the kind of Northeast Highlands. Loch Lomond is obviously the grain complex within Loch Lomond. Again, I'll reiterate that the bottle I shared with you tonight is not made in their grain complex. It's actually made from malted barley in their malt distillery. Invergordon is owned by White and Mackay and takes care of most of the grain whiskey that's needed for blends such as, surprise, surprise, White and Mackay. So you can see, and we touched on it, and Ryan Sutherland touched on it as well when we're talking about the concentration of malt distilleries in the lowlands, specifically in the highly connected Central Belt, that kind of narrow waistline there of Scotland that we see, River Clyde, the Clyde estuary on the west coast, over to the Forth estuary and the Forth on the east coast. If I was to add in all the closed distilleries that we've lost onto this map too, you would see that concentration in the lowlands becoming even more so. But this is where we are today. In the lowlands, we've got Cameronbridge, which is the biggest. That's Diageo owned. North British, which is owned by Lothian Distillers, which is actually a kind of 50-50 ownership between Edrington and Diageo. Starlaw is owned by the people that own Glen Turner brand and Glenmorangie. Lamartine Quay is a French company, but that was built very recently in the Central Belt to take care of mostly the French market. Reivers is a tiny concern, maybe making 40, 50, 60, 70,000 litres per year, quite experimental stuff and things. There's talk about the equipment from Reivers at some point making its way down to become a Campbelltown distillery. It'd be interesting to get some intelligence there. But because of the nature of Reivers and the scale of it, we're not going to be spending any time focusing on them tonight. We're in the big grain complexes tonight. Over on the west coast, down in Ayrshire, we've got Girvan, which is owned by William Grant's son. One of the most fascinating stories in whiskey is about this distillery that exists down there. It also has Ailsa Bay Malt Distillery within the same complex. But this was built almost out of protest. There was a famous fight that happened back in the 1960s between DCL, who became Diageo, and William Grant's. DCL was supplying William Grant's with their grain whiskey for all the blends, all the famous blends such as Grant's and Standfast and all of these famous brands. And there was a fallout, and I believe the fallout was actually over an advertising campaign, which was really quite soft and generic. I don't understand what the truth behind the fallout was. But the William Grant's, I think, realised the precarious situation that they were in, relying on another company. And in the space of less than a year, I think the story goes, or in a very, very short space of time, they built a huge grain complex down in Ayrshire. And now they are no longer reliant on DCL or anyone else. I'm sure there's still trading happening, but that was the early 60s. Also, round about the time that they started to market Glenfiddich as a pure malt. And there are people in the industry at the time that believed that that was another petulant move as if to give a second fist of two fingers up to DCL back in the day for being so arrogant and so easily offended. Anyway, if we go up to Glasgow here, Pernod Ricard owns Strathclyde Distillery. Kinclaith was a malt distillery in Strathclyde back in up until 1970s. But today it's a grain complex, and obviously it's providing everything for the Pernod Ricard blends. And that covers, so the 7 distilleries that I'm focused on tonight is obviously Loch Lomond, Strathclyde. I don't have a Strathclyde on hand, that's for the future. Girvan I don't have tonight, but you can buy them. That'll be in the future. Starlaw, I'm not sure you can buy any single grain from Starlaw, and need to do some research there. But the ones that we know that we can, North British, Cameronbridge, and Invergordon are all represented here tonight. Let's get on to that after I give you an idea of scale. Here's the scale here, and I've tried to make the circle represent roughly what the scale is so you can visualize it as well as the number. By far the biggest is that distillery out there owned by Diageo in Fife, Cameronbridge, 150 million litres per annum. Down at North British, 72 million litres just over the water in Edinburgh. The second biggest distillery is that complex that I just told you about, the William Grant's Girvan, 110 million litres. Strathclyde Distillery is kind of average sized, about 39 million. Likewise, Invergordon up in the Highlands, 36 million litres. And then the smaller ones there of Loch Lomond and Starlaw. Loch Lomond is the smallest. I know that Reivers is still on the map there, that little tiny dot there. But as I say, it's almost inconsequential. They're not playing in the same area as the other distilleries do. And it's just there because, strictly speaking, by definition, it is a single grain distillery. The smallest tends to be widely regarded as being Loch Lomond. So that gives you an idea of where they are, where these distilleries are on the map. It's very unlikely that you would seek them out. They're not tourist destinations. But they make, put it this way, it takes 150 batch-style malt distilleries to make the same amount of liquid as it does these 7 grain distilleries. So they are industrial plants. Let's get this Cameronbridge opened up now. This has been in my collection for a long time. I suspect I bought this, I'm going to stab a guess and say 2021, something like that. So it's a long time been waiting for this vPub to happen. That's why I would have bought this, because I had an intention one day to do a vPub on single grain. An aged single grain at a good price is what I was after. I don't know how much I paid for this, but I think I got it on sale and got it at a ridiculously low price. For 27-year-old Cameronbridge today, expect to pay something in the this is cask strength at 54.9%, but for that today, in a 70 cl bottle, expect to pay somewhere in the region of, I don't know, 80 or 90 pounds, something like that. Maybe some will creep over 100 pounds, depending on the bottler, depending on the provenance and all of these things. But really, for 27-year-old whiskey, to be able to get it sub 100 pounds is incredible, but it's possible for you, especially when it comes from the biggest grain distillery in Europe. Cameronbridge is working at a scale that is difficult to imagine. I think from memory, and I'm not 100% sure, I got this 50 cl bottle for 60 quid. 60 quid. 27-year-old whiskey. On the nose, there's lots that's similar to the last 2 whiskies. So what cask is this? I suspect it's probably bourbon. But there's lots of rich fruits, lots of dark fruits, and a nice hit of spice on the nose. Doesn't tell me anything about the cask on the back. Batch 9 this is, age 27 years, 54.9% ABV. It's got a Tiddlywinks final cartoon on the label. So there's no information here. So we're talking, this is not single cask, of course. Small batch, batch 9. But there's a bit of spice here. So if there is a almost suggestive of sherry, but I suspect that the spice is more likely to be from oak. American oak as well. You never know what can happen with these small batches. It could be remarried and put in a bit more active oak as a wee finishing before it's bottled. Juicy and sweet. Oh, wow. I think coming off of that really sweet kind of corny, popcorny thing that we just had, there's a real kind of tartness and juiciness to this. Wow, this is each one's getting more and more interesting, right? So this is like really quite. You would struggle to use the word dense for a single grain whiskey in my experience, but this is the most dense in terms of flavour. And if this has been a marriage of different casks, or if it has been kind of re-racked and further matured together or married or whatever, it certainly tastes like that. This is quite integrated. It's quite together. It's quite balanced. Lots of sweetness, cereal sweetness, breakfast cereal sweetness, almost like one of these, like I don't know, kind of honey nut cereals or even sugar puffs or that kind of thing. That kind of sugar sweetness with the cereal thing going on in the background. Lots of kind of oak wood spice. That's the kind of thing that's around the edges of the palate just now, is the spice, wood spice. But the spice is there like almost like a creme brulee, caramelized thing with like a dusting of a spice on there, like a soft cinnamon, soft caramelized brown sugars as well. Quite a finish. I suspect nobody will be able to buy this for the price I got it at now, but if I was to go on to the obvious, a company that sells this product now, and just do a wee search for Cameronbridge, because if they do it by batch, there's probably still some around. So what would this be retailing at today? Actually, it's still available today. Stunning. I overpaid. Now, this is a different batch, no doubt. What batch are they on now? Oh, no, this is batch 4. You can buy. It's much lighter. 27-year-old. It's 50 cl, the same as this, but it's less than 50 quid. It's not the same whiskey that I'm sipping right now. Let's see if there's anything. No, we're into all sorts of other types of things now, but that's amazing to me. So there you go. It looks like a much paler expression than the one that I have here just now, but it's got the tiddlywinks motif and things on the label. From Master Malt, you can pick that up. 27-year-old whiskey. I can't vouch for it. It's a different batch for 50 quid. 50 cl bottle. So that works out. It's 70 quid for a 70 cl bottle. But I think it's quite nice if you're going to be experimenting with grain whiskey and you don't know or feel a lot about it. It's quite nice that it's only a 50 cl, right? And then you're only burning 50 quid rather than potentially burning quite a bit more. I would say that because of the clearly cask activity here, I think that's what I need to express. That's what's coming forward on this. But I think it makes it the most dense, the most interesting that we've had. It's the chewiest. It's the one that hangs around the longest. Nice texture to it. All of the whiskies we're having tonight, they're sugar sweet. And the sweetness is here. Brown sugars. A wee bit of warm cinnamon. A wee bit of warm kind of cooking spice. That's the one I'm taking to the sofa to relax with out of everything we've had so far. Quite interesting. Very interesting, I'd say. How are you getting on with your singles? Derek Johnson is saying your tech skills are rocking, Roy. A transparent map image. Not really, it's just a PNG. But thanks, Rick. Thanks. I'm glad, and I hope it helps you visualize that you've got some things going on. Cesare is saying, yeah, I just poured myself a Kilkerran Peak Cast Strength Batch 10, 57.8% backer staff. Cesare, I hope you're enjoying it. Drew from Arizona says, do love that buttery popcorn flavour, Aquavita, but I guess that's more of the salty popcorn flavour. No, there wasn't. I didn't detect much in the way of a kind of saltiness going on at all. But it was a nice, it's amazing when you hook onto something like that and you identify that it's popcorn that you're getting, and then it's difficult to taste past it. Ben, Whiskey with Molly is in. Good to have you, Ben. I hope you're getting on well as I tuck into all of these really quite interesting single grains. Then you'll notice they're becoming more and more mature. So we've gone from a non-age stated, 2 14-year-olds into a 23-year-old, a 27-year-old. Let's go back into the realms of ghost distilleries, and we'll open up this bottle, which actually, I have to confess, this was kicking around for a wee bit cheaper, and I didn't pull the trigger. You could have picked this up less than £100, but by the time I came around to buy it, because I wanted to focus fully on whiskies that I would pay less than £100 for tonight. So that meant that £99.99 was my upper limit. I didn't want to go into triple figures. However, this one I wanted, and I searched around for something from Cambus, and I realized that it was going to be a harder thing to get a hold of, a good aged, well-spec'd Cambus for the price I was looking for. So I ended up paying, I think it was £105. I went a wee bit over. So the caveat this, that I have kind of broke my own rule with this one. But if we ever do a vPub like this again, looking at the rest of the single grain distilleries, I suspect that Cambus is going to be one of the ones that would be increasing in price. So I decided just to go for it. We lost Cambus, and Cambus was one of those Central Belt distilleries that Ryan was talking about back in the 1980s. And I think Cambus is now Diageo Cooperage. This is from the same company as the last Cameronbridge, just out of coincidence that I had. But this Cambus is batch 11 again. Bottled, there was 435 bottles. These are actually numbered. My bottle is 286 of 435. I guess at 50 cl, you could suggest that it's very, very likely that that's all come out of the same cask. Distilled at Cambus Distillery, 28 years old, 47% volume. Don't know if that's cask strength or not. And again, just generic information on the back. So not much more information than that. Let's get this in the glass. So 27 years old at Cameronbridge from a distillery that's operational. And here we have 28 years old from a distillery that's long gone. I think this Cambus was bottled in 2019. I was hoping the details were on the label, but that's me going from memory. I'm not sure. So it's been around a wee while. But we lost Cambus, I think, in the early 90s, mid-90s. I've got a wee cheat sheet somewhere. Let me have a wee look just so that I'm giving you the right information. $1993. Yeah, we lost Cambus in 1993. So that's consistent. 28 years old. One of the final distillations from Cambus, bottled 2019 at 28 years old. This is altogether lighter. So going on the back of that really quite rich Cameronbridge that we had here, it's almost like what's happened is I've gone into a kind of lighter, nuttier spirit. Almost like I'm now in the realms of Amontillado or something, if we were in the concept of sherry. It's weird that I'm speaking like that, but hopefully you can understand what I mean. There's a lighter, nuttier, drier nose to this. A wee bit more decadent where that one was quite dense. There's almost a sense that this will be a bit more elegant, a wee bit more refined. Lots of sweet notes on the nose again. Sweet overripe apple pear type orchard notes. Not getting much in the way of spice or anything, but there is a nuttiness to it. Wow. Okay, so we've just switched up completely. This is we're in a different lane altogether here. So this arrives almost like this is grape spirit. This is like, it arrives like a really quite sweet, well-behaved, well-defined and refined Armagnac, cognac type, brandy style. This is like, you know, the kind of slight solventy edges there, but the sweetness is there too, but the sweetness isn't like a sugar sweetness that we've had with the other ones. The sweetness in this is much more part of the experience. It's integrated and much more integral, I think. This is really refined, creamy. Somebody count how many times I say the word sweet tonight. But this is not toffee sweet. This is like a really quite sweet, super sweet candy floss style grape. Almost ethereal. It just kind of disappears. I mean, it's just a beaut. It's an exquisite taste, an exquisite flavor, a lovely, delicate thing. If you were to pick up an equally aged cognac or Armagnac for a similar kind of flavor experience, I think you would be in similar price point, maybe about 80, 90, £100 or something for. And he is 28 years old, so maybe you need to spend a bit more on the cognac Armagnac. I think a grain whiskey, even from a closed ghost distillery that's been shut for over 30 years, the distillery's been closed for over 3 decades, it's still cheaper than good quality grape-based spirits, I would say. This is just fantastic. I wonder if there's a whiskey-based score for this. I mean, my whiskey base tends not to. Okay, let's go to. Okay, there's only 2. Click on that one. That's ours, isn't it? 47%, 28 years old. So the whiskey base score is 84.17 from 8 ratings. Is there no one loving this? 84, 81, 84. Very low whiskey base scores. I think it's quite good that I do that, because then you don't see, you have to also remember uncorking a bottle tonight and sipping it up against these other ones. But for me, it's kind of continued that theme of getting better and better and better and better. And what's, I think, more interesting is that they're all single grains, but they are objectively very, very different drinks. There are similarities, the base DNA there in terms of the sweetness and the slightly solventy first approach maybe, although this one is much more, maybe it's still there, but it's just that I'm dialing it out as the night goes on. It's just an excellent, sweet, clean, easy to drink. 47% ABV is helping here. Very, very easy. Is it worth £102? £105? However much it was I paid for it. It's a 50 cl bottle. Okay, so we need to, that means that it's going to be somewhere in the order of, for a 70 cl bottle, we'd be looking at £140 for 28-year-old Ghost Distillery. We're sipping history. I think it would have to be a try before you buy at the price point. But I would say aye. I mean, that's, if you're sensitive to sweet liquids, a lot of the whiskey that I've been sharing with you tonight is not going to be in your lane. But if you enjoy exploring different spirits, if you're quite partial to an occasional rum, cognac, armagnac, brandy, whatever it may be, I think this would be right up your street. And to consider that there will never, ever, ever be Cambus whiskey again. This is never going to happen because the building that it was made in doesn't even exist anymore as such. It's been converted into a cooperage now. There's nothing that remains of its distilling history. That's long been taken care of over 3 decades ago. We are sipping Scotch whisky distilling history here. Wonderful that it's been allowed to mature for 28 years. Like I say, this has been in bottle as well for 5 or 6 years. It's taken a long time to sell out. This is typical with grain whiskies. Jeff Whiskey, my pal Jeff, is celebrating being a member of the Barflies for 13 months. Very late to the party tonight. Cheers, Flies. Listen, buddy, there's no such thing as being late for the Barflies. Late to the vPub. Whiskey with Molly's saying, right, I'm off to bed, folks. The quiz is on grain. I'll be no use at it anyway. It is not a grain whiskey quiz tonight, Ben. You'll ace the quiz. Long live the malt. Stay safe if you're in Scotland. Central Belt tomorrow. Big wins on their way. Absolutely. A. Martins is saying, why single grain is sweet? Because of the way it's distilled? Because of the barrel it was in? No, because of the raw, the main ingredient. It's wheat or corn as opposed to barley, and it's processed through a continuous distillation as well. Nice to have you in, A. Martins, whatever A stands for. It's good to have you here. Michael Wood is also saying he has to sign out now. Very interesting review of grain whiskey, Roy. I'm sensing there is something akin to bourbon in the style of whiskey. Good night, all. Yeah, a lot less oak involved, honestly, Michael. Come back with the chimpanzee and let us know how you both got on with the quiz at the end. Doodle Drama saying, I made the mistake to open a wee Rounds Creek next to the Port Dundas to taste a little maize, and it totally killed the poor wee gentle grain. Can't taste it anymore. My goodness, my goodness. Ben is suggesting that he's always full of hot air. Not at all, Ben. Come back and try the quiz tomorrow. I think you'd be surprised how well you'll get on. That's quite a pleasant wee surprise to me. I'm not sure it would be the type of thing that you would go back and pour again and again and again. I think the sweetness, and I think it's probably a theme throughout tonight, the sweetness would be the type of thing that you're going to at some point, especially if you're a malt lover, going to want to switch it up into something quite crisp, or something a wee bit more acidic, or something a bit drier, or something a bit more dense, or something a bit more oily and thick and heavy, some more body. You're going to be looking for other things. But I think it's quite amazing how lovely a wee drink, if you can get on with sweeter drinks, this wee lineup of products can be. How are we doing for time? 1 hour 33. It's a big surprise to me, by the way, that I've been able to get to this final point and still keep it under £100. But I'm going to share this with you because I have been able to do that. I'll just take the fussy plastic seal off this one now. Those of you that recognise this wee cork would know exactly the independent bottler I'm going to head towards next. But I'll tell you the specs on this bottle. It was distilled in the 1st of September 1989. Thinking what I was doing in 1989. Trying to pass my driving test. 23rd of July 2024. It was bottled at 34 years old. There's only 266 bottles, so it looks like a single cask. In fact, it is. They've got the cask number here, and it's right up my street in terms of label specs. Refill bourbon barrel, 018044. And bottled at 45.8% ABV. I'm going to suggest to you at 45.8, it's a very high chance that that could be cask strength. And this is from independent bottler Fragrant Drops, which have made a lot of impact on the scene in a very short amount of time, seem to be able to pick really quite creative, interesting, good quality whiskies that people seem to be very excited about. One of the ways they've made a name for themselves is through single grain whiskey. They've been standing behind the table at festivals and pouring these single grains for people, getting them to taste them and talk about them, and getting them to in a position where they're open-minded. You know, most of the people that are sipping these will be malt lovers at the festival or whatever event it was for malt's sake. And the people at Fragrant Drops have been able to get a significant amount of mind share by pouring them very, very good quality single grains. Now, I tried a well-aged, by the way, I forgot to mention, this is North British. So this is a North British entry tonight, mature North British entry tonight. I did try one of these at Glasgow Whisky Festival, but I am not 100% sure it was this bottle. What I want to tell you about this one is that I know that these are tricky corks to get out. Yeah. Let's try that again. This is not going to open. And it's not a cork either. Let's try to force it out with something. I've had trouble with these in the past, but not this kind of trouble. Just can't get my fingernails under it because... No, we're getting into this. We have to get into this. 34-year-old whiskey. Face of determination. Are you seeing this, Fragrant Drops? Your corks are pretty, but they're pretty hard to get open should the glue separate. Anyway, I'm going to find another wee cork to pop that back in again. Disaster averted. Let's get this 34-year-old grain into the glass as our last pour of grain whiskey tonight. Or last uncorking, at least. As I say, caveat all of these with the idea that I'm opening this. Wow, what's this? Refill bourbon? It's just age. There's a fusty edge to this one. And that acetone note, the kind of solventy note, is if it's here tonight, I'm not detecting it anymore because the rest of them have been more pronounced. Maybe you dial it out as the night goes on. Oh, let's lift. It's been waiting for 34 years. Let's give it a wee minute in the glass. Order Taste saying, eek, not my favourite looking bottle anymore. That's, to be fair, that's the first one that's happened with. It's one of the things about doing it live, right? If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I'm looking at that now. It looks a wee bit crooked. Doesn't look entirely straight. It's not going to focus for you guys to see that, is it? But I will attempt for it to focus. It's going to focus on my face. There we go. So you can maybe see that is not flush. It's not. So I wonder if that's anything to do with it. That's not happened before. But yeah, it's happened tonight. We managed to get into it regardless. Order Taste, good to have you in. And Cesare is saying, Roy, what determination? Yeah, I might have burst my fingers, but it's okay. I got in there. Says, no, everything's fine. Fingers are in good shape. Order Taste saying that bottle is my favourite bottle in all of Scotch. So I'm working backwards. Looks fabulous. Just need to buy one now. Any 100% oat grain Scotch. Ben, we're focusing on Scotch whiskey tonight. And as far as I'm aware, if I wanted to go to an oat single grain whiskey, I would have to go. I've got some on the shelf from Circumstance, but I don't know where I would get any from anywhere else. Justin Wan is saying, and everyone, is there any peated grain whiskies out there? Well, famously, I started tonight talking about Loch Lomond's. But what you have to understand is because the peat flavour came from the process of malting. So if you malt the barley and then you need to stop it, freeze it in time, right? And the way you freeze it in time is to dry it. And one of the ways of drying it over the years has been over a peat fire. So it incidentally picked up the peat phenols and the flavours from the peat fire. So it wasn't a designed-in flavour peat, but it is now. It's very much designed now. But if you think about the fact that continuous distillation is only using a very small, like single-digit percentages of malted barley, it's very unlikely that they're going to use peated malted barley for that. It would just be regular unpeated, hot air dried malted barley, and all the rest of the grains are unmalted. So where is I'm sure that it does exist, but it would maybe be matured in an ex-Isla cask, or it would have been a contrived thing maybe or something. But to my knowledge, I'm not very sure. Brian Cabayas is celebrating being a member for 12 months and 4 vPubs behind. Life's been busy, still dramming. Brian, there's no such thing as being behind. Be here, be in the moment, be now, and pick up the rest if you can be bothered, if it's convenient. It's nice to have you, Brian, as always. Whiskey with Molly is still here saying, all right, you've convinced me, I'll stay for now. Aye, we're on the last of the single grain drams, Ben, and then we'll take you into the not single grain quiz at the end, but there is a theme. Justin Wan and everyone, there are peated grain whiskies out there. It's okay, I picked that one up. He's asked the question. Hopefully I answered it for you, Justin. And maybe I need to look a bit harder. Maybe they are out there, but I've not come across it. And Whiskey with Molly Ben is saying, Method and Madness have an oat whiskey from Middleton. Yes. So again, non-Scotch, but they do exist. Ian Bruce is saying, did Inchdarney not release or distill an oat whiskey? They did a rye. Ian, they may have done an oat, but it's not something I have on the shelf. Interestingly, there are other distilleries out there, such as Ardbeg, Inchdarney, and things like that, that handle and have handled other grains other than malt. Even, we're told, places that are typically associated with malt, such as Chianinic. But that's not what I'm focused on tonight. So, you know, the rye law from Inchdarney Distillery in Fife was also a single grain whiskey. George Braley is saying it's a shame that single grain isn't as regulated to understand the nuance of the source. Yeah, I get what you're saying. You know, we'd like to know. We're geeks, right? We would like to know exactly what grain. We'd like to know the cut points and all of that stuff. But it's a different animal altogether from batch-made single malt, isn't it? Anyway, this wee fragrant drops. After 34 years, we've given it 5 full minutes. Come on. I want to say that despite there being less solventy notes, there's a sense of kind of there's a wood, an oak note, but it's almost like wood-stained oak. It's warm to nose. Soft spice. What's the ABV on this? I think I've mentioned to you already, 45.8. Very soft in terms of alcohol prickle. Not expressive from an alcohol perspective. I always look for fruit. It's not very fruit forward. It's quite sweet. Of course, it's sweet, but it's not as nosing as sweet as everything else tonight. Little nutty. Okay. Just fresh out the bottle, as you saw tonight. Oh, there's a creamy confectionery cream note here, a marshmallow, almost like, you know, that thing, what's it called? Whip or something. What's the marshmallow fondant thing? Sweet, creamy fondant. Wow, coconut, lots of coconut here. Macaroon. When I'm talking about macaroon, I'm speaking about the British, the Scottish macaroon snack. It's cream coconut with toasted coconut on the outside. Lots of coconut here, toasted coconut as well. My goodness, great finish. A weird, creamy, almost slightly, ever so slightly kind of cheese note on the arrival, quickly dissipates into kind of creamy sweetness. Slightly lactic, not in any way off-putting, just brings a flash of interest on the arrival. Really a real sense of maturity, a real sense of age and depth here, a richness. Still, the fruit is kind of remaining, just there's a kind of sweetness. It's like a conserve type jam type cooked fruit, reduced fruit. Kind of, this is something you could easily pour over ice cream. Maybe not thick enough. Again, there's a little bit like the last one that we enjoyed, the Cambus one, that tasted a wee bit like a grape spirit. I think there's an element of that here too. It doesn't quite have the texture. I think this is quite thin on texture. You know, the 45.8% ABV, I would love to know if that's cask strength. I think the way that plays on the palate certainly communicates like it should be, you know, with that sense that everything concentrates. There's no dilution, there's no diluting water added. So that, you know, it's arrived at that ABV just through natural concentration over the years. I would suspect that it probably is. I don't think they've diluted this one. I wish I knew what that thing was on the arrival. But you just know, you pour this in a nice stemmed glass, and you give it to someone and tell them 34-year-old whiskey. When they know that they'll feel like a VIP, they'll feel like they've been treated. When you sit on the sofa, pour it in a nice glass for yourself, you know you're treating yourself. 34-year-old Scotch whiskey, £99. £99. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the Scotch landscape in the years ahead. Will more of this stuff become available, especially from North British operational distilleries like this, where we are potentially guaranteed a future source of liquid? But if we look at the Dumbartons and the Cambus that we've been sipping tonight, and the Port Dundas, you know, long closed distilleries, those are still remarkably cheap, despite the fact that the liquid is diminishing, and it's diminishing quickly. Whether or not it's been bottled at 14 years old by the likes of Signatory Vintage, or been kept a wee bit longer to be bottled a bit later by them or other bottlers, that is not going to be replaced. But in the future, we will see more liquid from North British, from Cameronbridge, certainly from Loch Lomond. I've got Invergordon here on the shelf as well. One of the most stunning whiskies of last year was this. I mentioned this on a vPub before, and you can see how well I'm getting through this. This was Sugar Mice, super sweet, but it had a lovely acidic spike in the centre of it. This is an Invergordon. I've not sipped this tonight at 51.4% ABV. But the theme stands throughout all of the whiskies I've shared with you tonight. The theme is sweetness. Now, I've reached for an extra glass because I promised to do one thing, and I think I should do that. I've just gone up through the years. I've gone from non-age stated, but it's between 7 and 12 years old. I've gone 14 years old, 14 years old. I've gone 23 years old, 27 years old, 28 years old, and I've finished on a 34-year-old for £100. And now I'm going to pour a bottle of whiskey that costs half that, but it is made from 100% malted barley in a batch process and in pot stills. This is single malt whiskey. This is what we are actually here for most weeks. And it is 1/3 of the age of that Fragrant Drops North British. This is just... I keep hearing stories that this has been discontinued, but I absolutely adore the stuff. I think this is a fantastic example of a modern Scotch malt whiskey. 12 years old, all natural, 46 point ABV, one of the heaviest glass bottles out there. I think it's quite weighty, quite a heavy thing. And now, after all of these really sweet whiskies, I'm going to dive straight into malt and see what it does to me, my condition, my thoughts, my perspectives. The reason I've picked this one is it's neither cheap or expensive. It's neither young or old. It's just kind of sitting in the middle of the malt spectrum. And it's one I know that I love. You know what I smell immediately? And I don't know if I've ever smelt it. If I've ever nosed a glass of this Altmore and got such a blast of malt, the type and note, the smell that you would have if you turned up in the courtyard of a distillery and you stood in a distillery as they were mashing in. Really creamy, grainy malt. Lovely fruit, delicate orchard fruit. A wee hint of tinned fruit, tinned mandarin, maybe even a wee bit of tinned pineapple, some citrus, bright fresh citrus, tangerines, mandarin. I said tinned mandarin, but I'm getting the brightness, a zestiness too. So what we're getting immediately here is that I'm scrambling and I'm searching the glass because what I'm being hit with is complexity. Difficult to tie down, difficult to isolate individual things. I have to say that that's not been the case with what I've been nosing tonight. These have been much more kind of big, broad streams of things, where this is much more lots of narrow streams of things. Much more complex. That creamy malt, I keep going back in. It's almost porridgey. It's never happened before to me. It's nosing this. Sweet orange, fresh and zesty. And a little bit of soft, if there can be such a thing as soft pepper, but there is spice. Anyway, cheers to the malt lovers out there. And therein lies the problem. I don't care where you are on your whiskey journey. You're good at tasting whiskey. You're fantastic at tasting whiskey. What takes practice is the articulation of what you're tasting in the whiskey. But you know from very early in your tasting, when you pick up two different liquids of any kind of from anywhere else, two contrasting liquids, it's very easy for you to dial in which you prefer over the other, which your favorite between the two. But it's also easy for you to dial in whether you like one or you don't like one, or things like this. So what takes practice is how to help you convey what that experience is to other people through language, through tasting notes and things like that. What you cannot escape, and I'm speaking about from flavor, texture, the way it interacts, the way it arrives, the way it develops, the way it finishes, everything about this malt spirit is clearly, to my palate, superior. That seems cruel. These are wonderful drinks that I've really had to focus on and think about and enjoy tonight. But sipping this, I expected the malt to stand up well at the end of tonight, but I figured that I'd be putting it maybe up beyond the halfway point. But this... Altmore 12 is a fairly sweet whiskey. There's enough sweetness in this glass for me to enjoy it. A lot of the notes I've just shared with you are quite sweet notes, sweet citrus, certainly. But there's something easy to drink about that whiskey because of the texture, because of the way that it arrives, and because of certainly the way that it finishes. There is you want to go back. Now, I'm going to go back to, what was the dense one? Let's go back to this Cambus. Was it Cambus? No, this is the Cameronbridge. The nose there was a big blast of treacle, toffee, treacle. Yes, dense, super. This is the sweetness. If you don't have a sweet tooth, single grain is not your whiskey. Let's go back to that popcorn Dumbarton. Kind of lost. I've lost the popcorn thing. Wow, sweetness, toffee, nutty toffee, a marathon, a Snickers, a nuts and caramel type thing, and then the Altmore, herbaceous, herbal. Brilliant. Here's how I'm going to summarize tonight, and I had no thoughts in my head about this until this very second, this moment. And I'm not speaking about in the context of whiskey fatigue or anything. We can all suffer from it from time to time. If you are suffering from it, just take a break. Do you well? Does the whiskey great? But when you are when you're kind of malt fatigued and you're all saturated with malt, maybe it could be a rum or a brandy or a cognac. It could be any of these alternatives, something else. They tend to be sweeter. And in my experience, even the well-aged examples tend to be a little bit more straightforward and simple. But what is undeniable about every single thing I've sipped tonight is that flavor is there. And it's there in waves to be enjoyed and to be explored and to be understood. There is age to be enjoyed and understood and easily afforded. There's really like 3-decade-old product for less than £100. I mean, come on, it's crazy. Will it last forever? We hope so. But it won't last forever for these ghost distilleries and things. But what it does do is it means that you come away from it saying, wow, I quite enjoyed that as a little lane change. And it will help you also fall in love all over again with what you discover in malt. I meet lots of aficionados out there who love their malt whiskey who also have a wee soft spot for single grain. They love it. And I meet lots of malt lovers out there who don't touch single grain whiskey at all. But they also seem to be the same people that are less comfortable with blends. And I suspect it's maybe got a lot to do with the way the liquid interacts with them as individuals. It's not for everyone. But for me, I think I've got some really quite special, interesting and unique bottles of whiskey on the shelf that are going to be nice for me to dip into now and again to remind myself, and it's about this, it's not what I expected this vPub to be tonight, how special malted barley actually is. All the while being able to taste a different take on Scotch whiskey, history, the dynamics of Scotch, what blended whiskey is built on. Everything tonight that I've sipped has been thoroughly enjoyable. There is nothing that I would not want to pour a second glass of, but I might not want to pour some of them consecutively, if that makes sense. Going back for a second glass in the same moment, I think I would, because of the sweetness potentially, I would want to switch it up and change it up. Jimmy Legg's bought us a dram to say, that's one of the greatest things about malt whiskey. Once you discover it, everything else in life seems so simple. Well, it's a nice way to sum it up, Jimmy, but I didn't want to be that kind of reductive. I wanted to have a reason. And it's kind of happened. I didn't sip this Altmore tonight before. I just picked it because of the reasons that I justified earlier. So my reaction to you tonight is the honest, visceral, kind of in-the-moment reaction. Switch the cameras and lights off and sit in a quiet space, and I might be able to draw some slightly different or alternatively nuanced takes on this. But I think my feeling is that really, really, really enjoy all of these single grains. And given the history, the value, the lane change value proposition that they give us, I encourage you all to pick up a wee bottle as a side distraction. But my takeaway is that I know now, just through sipping 2 or 3 sips from a 12-year-old single malt, I know now why one of the most naked shelves in my vPub is the single grain shelf. It's been fortified in recent weeks for this vPub tonight for this purpose. I think it's been valuable to do. I think it's fabulous. I think that Fragrant drops the value for £100. That's just incredible. And that's been the theme all the way through. But what's also been the theme is sweetness, a wee bit of an acetone solventy note. And something that is not enjoyed from those, that is clear to me from that wee glass of malt. And maybe I could, do you think I could get that on the, if you can see how this malt is just clinging to the glass as well. Now, it might be that was happening with some of these grain whiskies tonight, but it wasn't obvious to me. But if I look at this glass, it's just so obvious. Just the oils just sit on the edge of the glass and cling to it. I don't know if you can see. I hope you can see. And that is not just something that's pretty to look at. It's part of the. Anyway, I expected to have a completely different takeaway. I expected to finish tonight talking about the rarity, talking about the privilege that it is to be able to sip from Ghost Distilleries from ridiculously affordable prices. Sub £40 for that Port Dundas tonight. You can sip history. That's fantastic. But I have to caveat it. You do need to have an appreciation for quite sweet spirits. And if you like drier, if you like peatier, if you like peaty whiskey can be sweet. If you enjoy things that are not sweet, you might find that it's a single dram experience for you. I think it's wonderful to be able to afford things that can make us consider, like I did earlier tonight, what was I doing in 1989, right? It might not last forever. We might regret the day that we didn't buy up the Cambus, and we didn't buy up the Dumbarton, and we didn't buy up the north of Scotland and all the other closed grain distilleries. But I suspect that I think we are going to continue to love our malt whiskey, and me sipping that tonight has been quite a wee surprise. David Hong has bought me a dram. He never mentions anything, does David? But he's always in here and he always buys a wee dram. And for that, buddy, I appreciate it. Here's to you, David Hong. Thank you very, very much, my friend. Slàinte mhath. Danny Hebbington as well. I think I've taken from this is I have far too much malt to try before I go grain. No, you're mistaken, Danny. If I may, buy one grain. Don't buy a cheap grain, buy a good grain, a decent age statement on it. Maybe one that's been recommended by a friend, one that you've been able to try first. Just one. And until you do that, you won't experience what I've experienced tonight. I think it's reinvigorated, reassured me about why I'm such a head case when it comes to malt whiskey. Danny, thank you so much, buddy. Cheers to you. Nice to have you in, Danny, as always. I predict, fragrant drops. It's not lactic, it's not cheesy, it's like it's a creamy thing, but it's not. That's a weird thing. I'm going to need some time with that. Sorry, Danny, I was going to predict that 2025 will be the year that we finally meet. Do you think that can happen? Anyway, Peter Lee's in. He's saying, I've not delved into grain whiskey. Maybe you can help me. Well, pick it up. I know you've been working tonight, buddy. It's nice to have you there on Monday night. Loved the pleasure of the company of you and Denise. It was magic. But if you pick it up on the replay, you can see that I've been through quite the spectrum of grain whiskies tonight, and it's been a pleasure to get some of these sealed bottles open in front of you all and share it with you. Steve Atkins is in saying, malt, 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 the only way is malt. Okay, with still over 200 of you in, and for that I'm very, very grateful. As we roll into the quiz at the end, I was fully aware, and I suspect the reason I've put off the grain whiskey vPub for so long is I had a suspicion it might not be the most popular. But actually, we did okay tonight. There was a lot of you in, and there's a lot of you still in right up for the quiz at the end tonight. The quiz at the end will be a very typical Aquavitae quiz at the end. There is a theme, however, and it is not grain whiskey. We've done the grain thing. I suspect, with your permission, I'll do it again in the future because we've got other grain distilleries. We've got Strathclyde to try and uncover. We're going to spend a bit more time with Invergordon and Girvan. These are available. Starlow, I don't know how I'm going to get my hands on that. And there are other closed distilleries, maybe a rare Carsbridge or something like that. You never know, a wee north of Scotland or a Loch side. These are still occasionally available from time to time, but I might try to do a kind of different take rather than just tasting them, to talk about just how impactful and how significant grain whiskey has been to the legacy of Scotch whiskey. But now it's time for that quiz at the end. And it's a good one, and you will spot quite quickly what the theme is tonight. For those of you that don't enjoy the quiz that's going to bail out just now, that's okay. I'll raise a wee glass just to say thank you very, very much for joining us. And I look forward to welcoming you back next week when we talk about, I think next week's topic is going to be the 2025 edition of the Permashelf and how it's changed. Permission to change my mind, but that's the plan that's in the schedule just now. Cheers, everyone. Those of you that staying for the quiz, you'll enjoy it. Cheers. I love whiskey. It's a very nice thing. Okay, good luck, everyone. The quiz at the end, for those of you that are participating for the first time, I imagine there are very few of you, but for the one or two of you that might be in here, listen, it's always multiple choice. You're only ever playing against yourself. If you're picking this up on the replay, open up the live chat. You can do that in the buttons underneath. Open up the live chat and you can follow the crowd along, and you can either choose to go with them or go against them. It's up to you. But either way, the point of it all is that you're having a wee bit of fun and you're learning something to hopefully the first 5 questions tend to be quite easy. And then after the picture quiz at question 5, after the picture question at question 5, it tends to get tricky. And then finally, we end up on a very deliberately awkward and difficult asshat. And the idea of that structure is that means that a 10 out of 10 on the quiz at the end is genuinely something to celebrate. David Lorenco, my friend David in Portugal, saying alternatives are great to check the landscape. We all need to get a step back to see the full picture from time to time, and grain is great for that. I think that's the lesson I have actively taught myself tonight, David. All I had to do was ask you, and you'd have been able to tell me beforehand. Question 1. Good luck, everyone. Which of these brands, that should say, feature a stag's head on their actual whiskey bottle? I'm going to give you 3 brands, and I want you to tell me which of them feature a stag's head on the bottle. A, Glenfiddich, B, Loch Lomond, or C, Dalmore. Which of those three feature an actual stag's head on the actual bottle? Overland Drams, Chuck, you're in. Good to see you, buddy. I hope you're doing well. You're a good man, and it's nice to have you playing the quiz at the end, saying defo that it's C. Lots and lots of people agree with you, but lots of people are spreading across saying ABC, 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 ABC. You have to be careful at the quiz at the end because the wording in the question can be a wee bit tricky at times. Stuart Dalgleish, that looks like a new name, Stuart. It's nice to have you in here tonight. He's suggesting that it is A, B, and C. All of the above, but to be safe, I'll say C, says Danny Hebington. Ben, Whiskey with Molly, none of them two are on the label, and one is plastic attached to the bottle. Which of these brands feature Stag's Head on their actual whiskey bottle? Yes. The differentiation between the glass embossed and on the printed label and everything might follow tonight, but tonight, you're absolutely spot on. Glenfiddich do have it. Screen printed, very modern version of the deer's head. Loch Lomond have it. In fact, I've got a bottle in front of me tonight. I know I'm in a tiny wee window, but hopefully you can see the stag's head there in the corner from Loch Lomond. And Dalmore, as it's already been pointed out, has the moulded plastic thing glued on. They think it looks classy. I wouldn't care about how it was made of plastic or otherwise. It was more to do with the liquid for me, and that's just as plastic, in my opinion. Dalmore make gorgeous liquid. What makes it out into the market is not that. But if you've answered A, B, or C, take a freebie tonight. Nobody's going home on a donut from the vPub quiz at the end. All of them do. Which of these distilleries feature an animal in their branding? For question 2. I'm going to give you 3 distilleries. You need to tell me which one deliberately features an animal as part of their branding. Is it A, Tomatin from the Highlands, B, Glenglassaugh from the Eastern Highlands, or C, Craigellachie in Speyside? Which of those distilleries likes to feature an animal? Tomatin, Glenglassaugh, or Craigellachie? Oh, slow to start, slow to start. David Lorenko is saying even the monkey gets a point. So the monkey, the chimpanzee thing, you know, it's to do with what's his name? Hans, the Gapminder guy. Oh, I feel bad for getting his name now. Fantastic guy. He used to do a thing where if you give somebody multiple choice scores or quizzes, then they have, if it's 3 multiple choice, for example, a chimpanzee can score just by, chance 33%. So if before you start the quiz at the end, write down 10 letters, A, B, or C, so that you're playing against this kind of imaginary chimpanzee and see how many times the chimpanzee can score a pass mark 5 out of 10. Drinking a Tomatin 14 port cask, says Ben, just reached for the bottle. It's a favourite, that wee port cask. I suspect for people that like port flavours and port maturation, that is a wee bit of a hidden gem, and it has been for a number of years now. Lassie Hort Oatsman is in. Good to see you, buddy. Sugar Kitty is here as well. Good to have you in, Sugar Kitty. Hey, I know Sugar Kitty's name now. I wonder if it's okay to tell people that he's called Jeff. Okay, Tomatin is the brand that features an animal. You're thinking, wait a minute, what animal's on Tomatin? On the label, on the crest, and on the cork is a boar's head, which is a hog's head. And that's why Tomatin has it. Okay, question 3. Which brand once featured the phrase Westering Home on the label? This was actually printed on the logo crest, but it's since been removed. Who am I talking about? A, Old Pulteney, B, Tobermory, C, Bunnahabhain. Rick Johnson is saying sugar kit equals Jeff. I hope I've not let the cat out the bag there, but it's not Jeff with a J, it's a Geoff. Sugar kit. If he disappears and he's angry at me, I'm sorry, but aye. But it's Jeff, not Jeff, at least at the moment. And sugar, he's reassuring me that it's okay. Thank you. Graham Fraser saying, I still have bottles of it in the stash. Graham, it's nice to have you in, buddy, and I don't doubt for a second that you do. Bruce Bernard is in. Good to see you. Going with the crowd. See fallen. Going with the crowd, says Ben Demon Hunter. Craig McGinn. Jacek Gawel. I think Jacek Gawel. I'm probably making a mess of your name, buddy. If that's the first time I've welcomed you, it's nice to have you here. But along with Craig McGinn and Graham Fraser, Bruce Bernard, and a few others, you're all going with Bunnahabhain. You seem to think that it's Bunnahabhain that says Westering Home. It's based on the David Brodie staggering home after the pub. David Brodie of Bunnahabhain fame, then, Ben. Let's see how we're going here. Yes, indeed, Bunnahabhain. Under the crest of the kind of the helmsman, you know, he's steering the boat home, and it used to have Westering Home underneath it. I think it should still have that. Hellswood is saying, always fun to hear David Brodie singing. This in Warehouse 9, and Peter is saying, if theme then label. The theme is branding, buddy, branding. Let's keep going, see how we get on with question 4. Seeing a badger depicted on a Thompson Brothers independent bottling would suggest it's from which Speyside distillery? If you see a badger on a Thompson Brothers bottle, what are you going to know immediately before you inspect the details on the label? That it's from A, Clynelish, B, Blair Athol, or C, Dalhuin? Where's it going to be from? Three for 3 for Alan McLaughlin. Good to see you in, Alan. Still. Graham Fraser also on 3 out of 3, of course. Robert Rutherford. I know I've welcomed you in before, buddy, but you're a relatively new name, and it's nice to have you back again. Chuck has slipped up on something already. Oh dear, you went against the crowd on something. Easy one. Just read, says Petehead. Just read, he's saying. Easy one. Frank's been around long enough to know how I structure these things. Whiskey with Molly is saying, I once saw a badger Westering Home. That tomato port cask is doing you a special treat tonight, Ben. Okay, read the question. It's from which Speyside distillery? Clynelish is in the Highlands, of course. Blair Athol is in the Southern Highlands. Dalhuin is the only Speyside distillery there, so it should have been easy. Just in case anybody out there didn't know the Thompson Brothers badger branding for Dalhuin. I suspect most of you are enjoying a 4 out of 4 tonight. Well done. As we move into the picture question, I'm going to give you a really different take on the picture tonight. Instead of zooming out and distilleries and still houses and things, we've zoomed right into the point that you can see the texture on the label here, I've just noticed. But I'm just going to ask you which region this branding comes from. Does this branding come from Islay, Lowlands, or the Highlands? Flora and Fauna 2 says that's where I think they get their inspiration for quite a bit of the branding. Actually, Jimmy, you're absolutely right. The Dalhuin Flora and Fauna is sometimes I have a Dalhuin kicking around, not always. But I do tonight, and I'll need to put this on a bigger screen so that you can see, but there you go, badger. And I suspect that you're absolutely right, Jimmy Legg, that's where the Thompson Brothers take their inspiration from for their branding. Erwin is in. Good to see you, Erwin. Erwin Laranaga, wonderful to have you. Going with the crowd and thanking them. Lower the image a wee bit more. Aquavite, he's having a laugh. Yes, because he knows what would happen if I lowered the image. we are looking at Laphroaig. Of course, we're looking at Laphroaig, which means the answer to question 5 is that it's Islay. And if you can see what he's talking about there, Islay single malt is mentioned just above the word Scotch whisky. So, yes, that was the brand new livery for Laphroaig. So a lot of people might have been thinking about the old images. I don't know if that caught anyone out, but there's lots and lots of you celebrating 5 out of 5 just now, knowing that it's Islay Whiskey with Molly's found the frog, the Laphroaig, or laughing frog emoji. Let's move on to question 6. It's going to get tougher from here on in. What adorns the cork of the most modern bottles from Deanston? What's on top of the cork from Deanston? A coin, B, a wheel, or C, an animal? What is on top of a bottle of Deanston? Now, I've had that wee Altmore. I'm going to pour a Deanston right now. And the one that I happened to have on hand was the 18. I didn't pick out this 18 with any design other than the fact I wanted to be able to show you the cork, but it means that I've got another wee malt to pour. And as you know, there's a storm coming in and I'm not going to be driving anywhere tomorrow. It means I can treat myself to a wee 8th dram, which is pretty cheeky for the vPub, but it's happened in the past and it'll happen again in the future. But I think we always have to be mindful about how many we're having. And this is the first time that I've filled a dirty glass tonight. This has gone in the same glass as the Altmore. So however many glasses I've got at the end of the night, that'll tell me how many drams I've had. Some will end up in the spittoon. Cheers. What are we, Deanston 18? Now this is a sweet whiskey. Cracking value too. 18 years old, £85 still available for. Amazing. A wheel can look like a coin, says Justin. Rick Johnson is saying you have a spittoon. Yeah, the spittoon isn't the sense that it's a sink. The glasses go upstairs and what I don't finish go in the sink. The banana skin causes too much anxiety, says Mike Molasses. Well, of course, because Deanston is absolutely famous for its water wheel, its turbines that it has instated now, but in history, part of history, it famously had a water wheel. But these days, I can tell you that what it has is a reproduction of a Deanston penny. That is a coin on the cork of a bottle of Deanston. It's a reproduction of a coin, and it was the currency of Deanston Village. It was a malt. Sorry, it was a malt. It was a cotton mill before it was a malt distillery, and the staff, the employees. This is just so draconian, right? They were paid in a currency that they could only spend in Deanston Village and in the shops that were available there, or this shop that was available there, and of course. That meant that probably the prices were artificially controlled. It's just horrendous to think about now. So Deanston, I think, recognised that that was part of their heritage, but I don't think in any way they want to support such a concept. It's not a good concept whatsoever. But it was once a thing at Deanston. The Deanston penny was a real thing, and that's what they commemorate on the top of the cork. Nothing to do with whiskey production. Until the 1960s, it was a cotton mill. A lot of you are enjoying a 6 out of 6. Oh, a lot of you have slipped up and are on 5 out of 6. Oh, I wonder if a lot of you answered wheel. Jerry Miller is on 6 out of 6. Bruno Martins is on 6 out of 6. Did that banana skin actually take a lot of you out? There are no wheels at Deanston anymore. It's been removed. They've replaced the water wheel with turbines. George McLeod, good to see you, George. Enjoying a 6 out of 6. Steve Atkis, so that's a 6. Cesari's on a 6. Some of you managed to slip up. I have a 2017 bottle that has a coin on the cork, so didn't think it was that. Oh. Well, does that mean that Ben slipped up? I hope I've not created an enemy. Banana skin's there for a reason. You need to think. Just double check. Anyway, everybody associates Deanston with the water wheel that's long gone. The thing that's on the cork is the coin. Let's get back to the quiz. Question 7. It's not going to get any easier. Which of these brands feature a pair of eagles on the paper label of their current official releases? I'm looking for a pair of eagles on the paper label. A, Isle of Arran, 10-year-old. B, Eagle Rare, 10-year-old. C, Ardmore Legacy. Which of those 3 features a pair of eagles on the paper label? Maybe should be a banana skin here. Not sure. I don't think so. Erwin Laranaga is admitting 6 out of 6, but only because of the crowd. Erwin, thank you for your honesty. That's part of the fun of playing the vPub quiz at the end live. You can lean on the crowd. If you are playing this on the replay, just open up the live chat. You can do it underneath. Maybe if you're on a mobile device, it looks like it's the comment section. Swipe to the left or swipe left to get to the right, if you like, and you'll find that the live chat is there as well, and you can watch in real time what the chat has been saying. Speaking to somebody, I was speaking to Jenny Carlson recently from Ardmorgan, and she openly admitted to me, and I love her for it, that she enjoys watching the vPub on replay just to reread the chat. I leaned on the crowd. Last question, says Rick Johnson. Fantastic. So which is featuring a pair of eagles on the paper label? This is not catching many people out. It is, absolutely, as the crowd gets perfectly, Isle of Arran. Eagle Rare has a huge eagle on the label. A single eagle. Ardmore Legacy has a huge gold foil eagle on the label, but Isle of Arran have 2 tiny eagles on all of their official bottling paper labels. If you answered A, give yourself a point. We roll into question 8. It's getting tricky, and I'm going to ask you, in which year did Benromac first feature their new, bold, red and white, or how it's become known, probably just by me, Soviet-style livery? I've put a picture here just so that you can know exactly what I'm talking about. But when did Benromac change to this new livery? Which year was it? Question 8. It's not going to be easy. Was it 2019? Was it 2020? Or was it 2021? It's going to be a high attrition question here, I suspect. Justin Wan's on 7 out of 7, trying to keep it together. Jimmy Jazz is on 7. Bob Sander on 7. Lots of you on 7 tonight already. Lots of you doing very, very well on 6 as well. Mike Molasses, good to see you scoring 6. Ben Whisky with Molly is on 6. I did manage to catch you out tonight, Ben. I know you hate me. Ian Bruce is on 6. Dave the Brave is on 6. Papa Q is on 6. Danny Hebbington, Lachlan McKenzie. But Bruno Martins is on a 7. Along with Jerry Miller, Cesare, Alan McLaughlin. Lots of you doing very well too. Bruce Bernard is suggesting that B is a guess. Some people, Jimmy Legg saying C. David Lorenko saying B. So this is a tricky one because we know that it happened relatively recently, but the last few years have been an amorphous or just a big blended blob of grey, right? It's just been this non-definitive few years, so it's difficult to work out when things actually happened. Fernando saying, I'm not sure on this, going for B. Joe Smith is saying B. Too Slow is saying B. Good to have you in, Rob. It's good to have you still here, Joe Smith. James Morgan saying B or C. I'll go C. Ian Bruce is saying B. I can tell you that Ian, Cesare, Too Slow, Joe Smith, all correct. James Morgan switching his choosing between B and C. He's going for C. It was way back. It's coming up in 5 years now that we've had this new branding from Benromac. The first 10-year-old came out in the start of 2020, or the first rebranding of this kind of red and white bold labeling came out in 2020. So it's been around a long time now. I think we're all quite used to it now, and I think most people agree when we see the old branding of Benromac that the new branding is actually better, despite the fact it was jarring when it first arrived. Justin Wan has just rejoined the Aquavitae Barflies, buddy. I can see you've got a gold barfly there. It's wonderful that you've been able to keep that intact, and it's nice to have you supporting, buddy. Question 9, second from last. Springbank's 18-year-old official bottling places its S motif on what colour of background. I was just about to, I'll reach for this Springbank to show you what I mean by the S motif here. And I hope that this doesn't sway you too much, but I want you to see what I mean. This is on a local barley. You can see the S here, this S motif. So it's usually positioned on an oval, but I'm asking specifically about the 18-year-old. What colour of background is that on? In the context I just showed you, it was black. What do we have for the 18? We have it on a purple background. B, we have it on a silver background. Or C, we have it on a black background. Branding, branding, branding. It's something that's constantly in front of our eyes, and I wonder how much notice we take. Two brands ago was best, says Jimmy Legg, talking about Ben Romack, of course, probably. David is saying 7 out of 8. A mistake is a learning opportunity. We'll not forget that Deanston story. George McLeod is also enjoying a 7 out of 8 as well. Hell's Wood. Oh, it just jumped there, Helen. So sorry. Still prefer the old style. Oh, okay. Wow, really? Kyle Taylor looking at it. Steve Atkins saying lots of people guessing B, and I suspect some people with a Springbank 18 on hands has let the cat out of the bag with everyone else in terms of what it is. So we know that if I show you the 10-year-old, for it just so happens that the Springbank 6 shelf is nearby, so I'll grab these, all of these actually. So the 10-year-old is on an orange background because it's an orange label. The 15-year-old is on a green background because it's on a green label. And the 18-year-old is a purple label, but the S motif is on a silver background. So going back to that, that means that it was B is the correct answer, which the vast majority of you got. I put a banana skin in there because I really thought I was catching you out on that, because you would immediately think it was purple in alignment with the other brands, but no, on the 18 it gets a silver background. Now we move into the ass hat at the end. Let's see how we're doing on who's on the 9 out of 9s and everything else. Ian Bruce on 8, Bruno Martin's 8, Whiskey with Molly Ben 8, Mike Molasses 8. Jerry Miller is holding on. 9 out of 9. You've got a chance. Cesare is on a 9 out of 9. So there's a couple of people in here looking for a 10 tonight. Big Ed on a 9 out of 10. Amazing. So that's 3. How many more do we have? I don't want to touch this because it's going to jump. It did jump. I'm trying to find all the potential 9s so I can get you a shout out. If I miss you, I do apologize. So we've got at least 3, 4 people. Sugar Kitty, Big Jeff is on a 9 out of 99 as well. Fantastic, buddy. Good luck. All right, ass hat is meant to be deliberately obtuse. You need to know the answer up to a couple of things just to know what's going on. Here is your ass hat for tonight. I can ask you, how many years have passed since the first ever Scotch whisky motion picture advertisement for Dewar's titled It's Scotch? So this was a black and white movie presentation, and it was the first time, and I think not just for Scotch whisky, I'm speaking about the first ever motion picture advertisement that ever existed. I want to know what year it was, and if from what year it was, it'll help you answer this ass hat question. How many years have passed since that took place? About the same as A, the number of years of dormancy for Glengyle Distillery. I should specify that that's the 20th century. So work that out. B, about the same number as the years passed for Glaswegian malt whisky prior to Glasgow bringing Glasgow malt back again in 2015. How many years were we without malt whisky being made in Glasgow? Or C, about the same number as Scotch malt distilleries listed in the first malt whisky yearbook, which incidentally was 2006 yearbook, released in 2005. I would love to get a copy of that. It's the only one missing from the collection. People are asking stupid amounts of money for them, but Aye, somebody out there's got one that they're not using anymore, or a duplicate or something. It's the only one I'm missing. How many years have passed since that first motion picture advert, which incidentally was for Dewar's Whisky? How many years has passed since that went out? The same number of years as the amount of dormancy there was in the 20th century for Glengyle, or the same amount of years passed for us waiting for it to have a Glaswegian malt whisky back again, or the same amount of years as there is a Scotch malt distillery count in the 2006 yearbook. Lachlan Mackenzie saying B, Robert Rutherford is saying A, and Whisky with Molly is saying C. All over the place. I feel obligated to answer A, says Mike Molasses. Talking about Glengyle. Ben Demon Hunter is saying C. Stevie O. Steve Orton is in. Good to see you, Stevie. Nice to have you in Glasgow on Monday night as well. Brilliant to have you there. Loved the Arnie pictures of you. I thought they were tremendous. I forgot to congratulate Arnie on the artwork. Hellswood is saying C. Joe Smith is saying B. We're all over the place here. Typical ass hattery. Chuck Overland Drams thinks it's A. George McLeod thinks it's C. Wild ass guess, Chuck is admitting, and Sugar Kitty Jeff thinks it's C. I reckon it's about 130 odd years. Whisky with Molly Ben. That's why tonight is going to be extra sore for you, because you normally are very good at reaching the 10 out of 10. And even with such a really obscure asshat as tonight, you could have done it if you hadn't slipped up earlier, because I can tell you that 79 years of dormancy for Glengyle Distillery in the 20th century, only 40 years. I mentioned earlier tonight about Conclaith and the Strathclyde Distillery. They were making malt whisky in Glasgow in the 70s. But the answer I'm looking for is 126 years ago. In 1898 was the first ever motion picture advert. I've got a wee picture of it here. You can find this on YouTube. It's utter nonsense. People just look like they've gone into somebody's dressing up box or wardrobe or something, put up a banner in the background saying Scotch whisky, and dressed in what they believe Scottishness looked like in 1898. This was not the garb that Scottish people were wearing back then. And they just stand in front of this camera and do silly dances, and that is apparently the oldest ever, or the first ever advert, and it just so happened to be for Dewar's whisky. So there we go. I'm going to jump in and work out who managed a 10 out of 10 tonight. With all, there are some 10 out of 10s, some people celebrating at 9 out of 10s as well. Fantastic. Cesare managed his 10 out of 10. Congratulations, my friend. You've now, because you're a barfly, you have access to all the emoji, which means, Cesare, you have the 10 out of 10 emoji at your disposal, and I can see it. Jerry Miller is celebrating his 10 out of 10. Fantastic. Hellswood is happy with her 9 out of 10 tonight, and I think you should be. Well done, Jerry, says James Morgan. Big Ed, my first 10 out of 10. Well done, Big Ed. Maybe that's the theme now for 2025 for you. Maybe branding is your thing. Cesare has found the emoji. Fantastic. Justin Wan renewed my membership in time for the emoji. So he's celebrating a 10 out of 10 as well, along with Jeff Sugar Kitty. Fantastic. For here on in, it's not just Sugar Kitty, it's Jeff Sugar Kitty, isn't it? Whisky with Molly saying, well done to all the 10s. Such humility from the big man who's normally getting 10 out of 10s himself. Fantastic. And Cesare, a third time celebrating his 10 out of 10. Jimmy Legg is saying, what was it like in Scotland in 1898? You were pretty young then, Aquavite. Well, I can tell you that that was not what we were wearing in 1898. But it's a funny advert to go back and look at. Maybe I'll put the link in the description below if I remember, but you can just search for Scotch Whisky ad 1898 or Dewar's Whisky ad 1988. The ad was called It's Scotch. Can I have a 7 emoji, Aquavite? That's normally what I get. That's an emoji for 7 out of 10. Enjoyed a grainy vPub. Cheers, Roy. Hunkered down tomorrow and stay safe. I know it's going to be interesting to see what tomorrow brings. We'll need to park the cars in a safer place in case the roof tiles come off. We're all kind of nervous about what's going to hit us tomorrow. But we live in a country that things can happen, but it's less likely than most of the places out there. Fantastic stuff. Congratulations to all the folk that managed to squeeze a wee 10 out of 10 on this branded quiz at the end. vPub. Quiz. Normally they don't have a theme, but I've been experimenting with it in 2025 so far, and the first 3 vPubs of this year have had themes. So yeah, I might continue to play with that. It's good fun. Lachlan is saying, well, batten down the hatches, Aquaviti, and thanks. Have a good evening. Very nice of you to think of us, Lachlan, and it's nice to have you in playing along at the end. As I mentioned earlier, I suspect that next week I'll be back here with a session on the permashelf for 2025. But like I always say, that's the plan now, and I reserve the right to kind of change my mind if something else comes on to trump that in between now and next week. Until then, I would like to raise this wee glass of, actually I'm finishing on a glass of malt, a wee glass of the Deanston 18-year-old, for no other reason than to toast you all and thank you for your health and your attendance and your continued support of the vPub. I'll remind you all that you're very dearly loved as I look forward to welcoming you back again for next Thursday night. And until then, Sláinte mhath.